Thank you. Okay, good afternoon and welcome to the Thursday, February 11th, 2 p.m. hearing for the Committee on Consumer Protection and Commerce. Welcome to all. Again, just in case we have testifiers joining our committee for the first time, I would respectfully ask that everybody show aloha when you testify. I think that according each other, mutual respect is what makes Hawaii such a special place. So we would ask for aloha as well as decorum. You will be called when it is your turn to testify. We do impose a 2-minute time limit on testifiers. So when you approach the 2 minutes, I will ask you to kindly summarize. We do have quite a few measures today on the agenda. So with that, we'll begin. We have our first agenda item, HB 304, and this is relating to deferred deposits. This would reduce the maximum fee of check cashers, or commonly referred to as payday lenders, what they're able to charge. First, we have DCCA, Iris Ikeda.
Aloha. So we would start on our testimony and just urge the committee to take a look at a consumer lending scheme instead of these deferred check deposits for consumer protection. Mahalo.
Thank you. We also have Richard Dan of Maui Loan Inc. in opposition.
Aloha. Thank you all for being here. I stand by my testimony, and I'd like to add, I'm a payday lender. There are very few of us left because there aren't that many paydays. I do it legitimately, and we do it here on Maui as an accommodation for our other customers. My average payday loan is about $150. That's about, at the present rate, that's about $20 is what we charge for a $150 loan. If you run overdrawn at the bank, you get charged $30 for $150. If you get a charge on your credit card for being late, $150, they're going to charge you $30. We only charge $20 at $15 at 15%. For us to write a loan for $150 costs us almost $16. We make very little money on these deals. To cut the charge that we're allowed to charge makes no sense whatsoever. We have a very good payday loan law locally. The biggest problem we're having with payday loans is internet lenders people are getting abused like all hell from these internet guys.
Ian, I found it. Ian, it was just way.
That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Members, that's all the testimony we have from those who indicated they would be present to testify. Please also note that we have supportive individual testimony as well. With that, members, any questions on HB 304? Okay, seeing none, then we'll move on to our next agenda item, HB 1192. This, thank you for your indulgence, members, is 100 pages of trying to change some of what might be the regulation framework for both installment loans as well as the more short-term loans like payday loans. And it's done so in 3 separate parts in the proposed HD1. First off, we have DCCA, Division of Financial Institutions, Iris Ikeda.
Aloha, and thank you for hearing this measure. So the department appreciates the intent of the proposed HD1 to address the unsustainable cycle of debt consumers face when they engage in these deferred deposits activity. The department supports stronger regulation in the area, which is in part 2 of the proposed HD1. A few reasons why the department prefers licensure over registration is that with licensure, we have ongoing supervision of the companies. DFI would conduct background checks on the principals or control persons so that folks who are what we would consider bad people would not be able to operate these companies. And thirdly, and probably most important, is that we believe with licensure there is increased consumer protection because even if there are no complaints by any consumers, DFI would continue to conduct exams on these companies to ensure compliance with consumer protection laws. And I will be available for any questions. Mahalo.
Thank you. We also have Mr. Richard Danigan from Maui Loan Inc. in opposition.
Aloha again. First of all, if you'll notice, there aren't many payday lenders testifying. Over the last 10 years, that this and similar bills to this have come, there used to be a lot of payday lenders testifying. There aren't many paydays anymore, so there aren't that many payday lenders. Legitimate payday lenders do not get people into a cycle of debt. If you follow the Hawaii law, you cannot get into a cycle of debt because what happens is they have to pay off the entire loan. The problem that you're hearing about are problems from mainland, international, internet lenders, and a few payday lenders locally who aren't following the law. The law we have is a very, very good law. It's probably the best in the country. I've read this 100-page bill. I've read almost verbatim bills to it for the last 10 years. None of these bills have ever succeeded. This committee has shot down this bill many times. I can't see why that it's coming up now in the middle of the pandemic when people need the money the most. We're making payday loans, very few of them now, not compared to what it was last year, but we're making them to people who need the money. If they're in a pinch, they get a loan from us. This is going to make it impossible. And you've seen this every time this bill has come before you before, and there's no reason why you shouldn't turn it down again like it is this time. That's all I have to say. If you have any other questions, I'll be here for your questions. Thank you.
Thank you. We also have late testimony from Jim Odell, Dollar Financial Group.
Aloha, and thank you for the opportunity to speak to you. And I'd like to applaud Chair Johansson for all the hard work he's put into this. We stand in support of 1192. We believe that the framework that it stands for is going to provide for a much more robust subprime lending market for consumers in your state. We have seen this regime work in other jurisdictions. We have similar businesses in Canada and throughout North America. And the regimes that have worked the best have been the ones that have provided the most options for consumers, particularly in this underbanked subprime space. And one of the issues that I think Hawaii has been struggling with is currently the only viable product in your state is the deferred deposit transaction payday product. What 1192 is seeking to do is add to that a viable installment lending product, which can help migrate customers from the payday product up to a more traditional loan product, and then hopefully hand off those customers into more of a traditional prime-based lending market that the banks can take off. So available to take questions later, but again, we support the attempts by 1192 to improve the underbanked credit market in Hawaii.
Thank you. Members, that's all the testimony we have from individuals or organizations indicating they would be present today. Members, any questions on HB 1192? Okay, thank you. Then seeing none, we'll move on to our next agenda item, HB 943, relating to non-depository trusts, and this will close out our lending section portion of this agenda. We have our first and only testifier, Division of Financial Institutions, DCCA, Iris Ikeda, with comments, or in support, excuse me.
Yes, we are supportive of this particular measure, and we believe that this will help the growing gap group of consumers who may need assistance in managing their assets, but do not qualify for asset management services by banks or other large investment firms. And I'll be available for questions. I would note that we already have one non-depository trust company, and we did use our regular bank trust company statutes to charter them, but it would be easier if we had a separate statutory provision for these non-depository trust companies.
Okay, thank you very much. Since that's our only testifier, members, any questions on HB 943? Okay, seeing none, then we'll move on to our next agenda item, HB 445. This is relating to increasing the estate tax. Do we have the Department of Taxation? Okay, so unfortunately, we do not have anyone from the Department of Taxation, but they offered helpful comments. Tom Yamachika, Tax Foundation of Hawaii.
Thank you, Chair. Tom Yamachika from Tax Foundation of Hawaii. We did submit written comments and we'd be available to answer any questions.
Okay, thank you, Tom. We also have the Hawaii State Teachers Association, Mitsuhika.
Hi, aloha, and HSTA, I'm speaking for Corey Rosenlee, our president. We are in support of HB 445. The reason we support this is this bill would lower the inheritance that's excluded from state tax down to 1 million instead of its current 5.49 million, which effectively would raise the revenue that this state much needs. The Federal Tax Cuts and Jobs Act gave a tremendous tax break to people for their inheritance already. So the state can recapture some of that, and that would help, especially with shielding our teachers from layoffs, our state workers, our essential services, the budget cuts that are happening. We're looking for ways to help the legislature recapture some of this money and tax fairly in Hawaii so our local residents can actually afford to live here. Thank you.
Thank you. We also have Will Carone with Young Progressives demanding action. Need support. Oh, I'm sorry, not here, right here. Oh, Will, please proceed.
Aloha, Chair. Yeah, Will Carone representing Young Progressives demanding action. We strongly support HB 445. I just want to emphasize that our current tax system exacerbates inequality. Working families pay up to 13% of their earnings in taxes, while the wealthiest families pay often less than 9% of their earnings in taxes. And the pandemic recession has disproportionately impacted those same working poor families and therefore exacerbated this inequality in our system. At the same time, our private sector economy has come to a halt because working families no longer have any money to spend. And as a result, the state doesn't have the revenue it needs to function properly. We believe the governor's proposal to cut government spending would lead us down in the wrong direction. All you have to do to see the effects of severe government budget cuts like those that we faced 10 years ago is walk around downtown and see the suffering on the sidewalks to realize we're still paying a tremendous societal cost for those cuts more than a decade later. We believe that success and wealth is only ever built on the system of public infrastructure, goods, and services that we all pay for through taxes. And therefore the top 1%, by virtue of being successful through this system, should pay more to ensure that that infrastructure remains available for the next generation to be successful as well. We must begin to rebalance our economy so that opportunity once again exists for everyone. And that's the only way we're going to end this recession. Tax fairness proposals like this one are an important part of that economic rebalance. So mahalo for your support.
Thank you. Next, members, this is classified in the individual section, but I think it's actually organizational testimony proffered by HCAN Speaks, Nicole Wu.
Aloha, Chair Johansson. Sorry, I must have clicked the wrong button. I am testifying on behalf of HCAN Speaks. I'm their new Director of Research and Economic Policy. We're a member of the Hawaii Tax Fairness Coalition, which in years past worked with you on passing the Earned Income Tax Credit and a lot of tax credits that help low-income families, which is why HCAN Speaks originally joined the coalition. This year, the coalition has been focusing more on finding ways to raise revenues in a progressive way. Because we, like the Teachers Association and Young Progressives Demanding Action, are very concerned about the cuts to social service programs, especially those that serve keiki and their families. We don't want to see the same sort of cuts that we saw during the last recession. This estate tax, as Mitzi mentioned, hits those at the top. It's folks who already are getting a tax break and can afford to pay a little bit more. We know that this won't solve the entire budget crisis, but it starts, it's in the right direction, and it's a contribution to help prevent the cuts. As part of the Hawaii Tax Fairness Coalition, some of us reached out to the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities in Washington, D.C. They ran a special analysis and found that dropping the exemption in Hawaii to $1 million a year would generate approximately $18 million a year in revenue. Of course, that's based on, the vagaries of who passes on their wealth every year. But that's what they looked at, seeing how our estate tax has been over the past several years. And I'm available for questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Members, that's all the testifiers who've indicated that they would be present in our virtual hearing today on
Jacob Hurlitz for taxation.
Oh, okay, terrific. Thank you. We do also have, I'm sorry, members, the Department of Taxation has joined us. Jacob Hurlitz, please.
Good afternoon, Marky. On behalf of Isaac Choi and the Department of Taxation, we stand by our written comments offering our written testimony offering comments. I will be happy to answer any questions that you may have, however. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And thank you for joining us. I believe now that is all the testifiers indicating that they'd be present to testify today, but please note, members, that we have numerous testimonies in support and opposition, both from various organizations as well as individuals on this measure. Members, any questions on HB 445? Representative Onishi.
Yes, thank you, Chair, for the tax department.
Yes.
So, understanding this correctly, the tax applies to the estate, not the beneficiaries of the estate.
That's correct. What happens is when the person dies, all of the assets of that person are valued, and it is the estate that has to pay the tax, not the beneficiaries.
So if a person has willed their estate to people, this tax still applies to the estate before the execution of the will?
That's correct. The estate tax, if it is subject to tax, must be paid before the distributions to the beneficiaries.
So right now, the bill calls for $1 million threshold.
Yes.
Anything beyond that would be taxable.
Beyond $1 million of a net taxable estate, that will be taxable.
Right.
And when I say net taxable estate, you have to take out, things like mortgages or things that might be owed in that property. So it's the net value to the estate.
So I think this applies maybe more directly to the city and county of Honolulu than maybe to most of the areas on the neighbor islands. But I would assume that if a single family home in, say, Kaimuki or some other older neighborhood, if that owner were to die, there's a good chance that that property, and have no mortgage or no debt to the house, that house would maybe valued in excess of $1 million.
That is correct. And I think, you also have bank accounts, they may own stock or things like that, or a vehicle that also gets added in. So whatever property that that particular decedent owned at the time, you value all of that. And then if it overcomes that threshold, whatever is over that $1 million will start at tax at 10%, and it could rise up to 20% depending on how high that excess value is.
So right now the federal threshold is 11 million.
Yes, ours is actually right now about half of that.
So 5 million.
Yes.
Okay. The I guess the beneficiaries of that estate if there was only, say, a property and not enough to pay the taxes on it, they'd have to liquidate the property.
They would either have to be able to borrow money, under their own credit, to be able to pay the estate tax, or the property would have to be sold to satisfy the estate tax.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Representative. Members, any other questions? Okay, seeing none, thank you. We will move on to our next agenda item, HB 113. This is relating to measurements and standards, and this would exempt hydrogen fuels from petroleum product measurement requirements. First off, we have the Hawaii State Energy Office.
Hi, this is Maria Tomei with the Hawaii State Energy Office. We are here for questions. We had comments. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. We also have the Department of Agriculture, Phyllis Shimabukuro-Geyser.
Good afternoon, Chair, members of the committee. The department stands on its written testimony, supporting the intent of the bill and offering comments.
Thank you. We also have Leo Obaldo from the Hawaii Department of Agriculture with comments. Guessing you're supporting the director's testimony.
Yeah, we support the director's testimony.
Okay, thank you. We also have Thor Toma from Servco Pacific.
Good afternoon and aloha. We stand on our written testimony of strong support. Thank you.
Thank you. Members, that's all the testifiers indicating they'd be present today for HB 13.
They're both here now.
Okay.
They're both here. Chris and Ellen are present.
Okay, yes, that's all of our testifiers for HB 113. But please also note that there's additional testimony, organizational testimony in support as well. Members, any questions on HB 113? Okay, seeing no questions, then we'll move on to our next agenda item, which is HB 181. And HB 181 would include the definition of intellectual property or property stored in an electronic medium in the definition of property, which I'm grateful to the prosecuting attorney. I have no idea that this is not able to be prosecuted considering how much technology has apparently surpassed our law. First off, we have the City and County of Honolulu Department of Prosecuting Attorney.
Good afternoon, Chair Johansson. Chris Van Deputy Prosecutor, City and County of Honolulu. House Bill 181 would update the definition of property as that term is used in Hawaii's penal code. That definition is the same definition that we've had since the penal code was adopted in 1972. The definition adopted at that time did not account for the fact that a lot of property now is maintained in electronic digital format. For example, right now, the statute can't be used to prosecute these types of theft of digital content. If someone steals a client list, if they steal e-training materials or e-tutorials or e-how-to guides, manuscripts, videos, research data, business records, and even paid webinars and other materials that content creators create and market and sell via the internet. So if we can update the definition of property, we can prosecute those who are not only using technology, but using it in a way to steal the electronic digital content of those who are creating it for their business and personal purposes. So we ask the committee to support House Bill 181, and I'm available for any questions. Thank you.
Thank you. We also have the Honolulu Police Department, Captain Michael Kunishima, in opposition.
Good afternoon, Chair. Kunishima with the Honolulu Police Department. We stand in opposition of this bill. We stand with submitting the following comments. With working with the prosecutors, we feel that removing the intellectual property would be beneficial because HP doesn't have the personnel investigative expertise to do that. So if we moved into intellectual property, then HPD would be willing to support this bill. Thank you.
Thank you. Members, that's all the testimony we have submitted on this measure. Members, any questions on HB 181?
Yeah.
Representative Onishi.
I guess, Mr. Van Marder.
Yes.
Obviously, I guess HPD did not talk to you.
So I believe someone at HPD did call me and they did ask for our position. And, essentially what they are describing is an issue that came up last year when this bill was first heard at the legislature. When it went through the various committees, the one concern that was expressed by, I believe it was either the House or Senate Judiciary Committee, they believed that keeping the phrase intellectual property in there would be problematic in that it might conflict with federal law. So the bill that went through last year's legislative session struck the words intellectual property. And so, if that's what the committee wants to do again this year, we're fine with that because we believe the language is broad enough that it'll address the concerns that we are seeing as prosecutors, where we're not able to prosecute people who are stealing property that happens to be maintained in electronic format. I believe HPD and us are on the same page in terms of prosecuting people for stealing property maintained in electronic format. But I think HPD is expressing the concern of one of the committees last year that thought that we should delete the phrase intellectual property. And quite frankly, if this committee wants to do that, we don't have a problem with that. I believe that the Judiciary Committee will probably do that again as last year. And I'll just lastly note, there was no opposition to this bill other than what I just said when it was heard by all the committees last year. And the only reason it didn't make it through to the end was because of COVID, and then it didn't come back when the legislature reconvened during the summer. But other than that issue, there was no opposition on the remaining parts of the proposed amendment.
Did you have additional questions, Representative Onishi?
Well, I mean, I think it would have been great if you had included in your testimony this history and, recommended that also be struck if it was done last year and the police department opposes it. But thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Members, any additional questions on HB 181? Okay, seeing none, then I'll just double check. Captain Kunishima. So you would be amenable then to this bill so long as, this is just to clarify because I haven't had enough caffeine and I just want to be unambiguously clear. You would be fine if intellectual property is struck from the bill and it's just limited to property that is stored in an electronic medium and is retrievable in a perceivable form?
Yes, you are correct. You probably should have supported the bill with making comments just to follow what the prosecutors want.
Okay, thank you so much. And thank you both for your testimony. Members, any other questions on HB 181? Okay, thank you. Then seeing none, we'll move on to our next agenda item. This begins our triples section of the agenda, largely, where we are the second committee, and the subject matter has been heard in its subject matter first committee. First, we have HB 1015 relating to the disposition of water licenses by the Board of Land and Natural Resources. This would clarify the conditions and manner in which the board may dispose of the water license. First off, we have the Department of Hawaiian Homelands, Bill Isla, with comments. Chair Isla, are you there? Department of, oh, sorry. I think my apologies to the public and the members. If we can just wait, I think Chair Isla inadvertently got booted off, so we'll just wait for him to log back in. So we'll continue while we wait for Chair Isla. Next, we have the Department of Land and Natural Resources, Ian Hirokawa. In support.
Thank you, Chair, members of the committee. Ian Hirokawa with our Land Division. We'll stand on our testimony in support of this measure, this admin measure, and I'll be available for any questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have the Kauai Island Utility Cooperative, Beth Tokioka, in opposition.
Aloha, good afternoon, Chair and committee members. Yes, we have provided written testimony in opposition to the bill. However, we largely support this effort and appreciate the effort of the department in dealing with these issues and trying to streamline and make more efficient the license process. The issue that we have is with one phrase in the bill, which would limit licenses to a maximum term of 30 years. And we feel that the board should be given the latitude to determine an appropriate license term based on the attributes of the project and the use of the resource. For KIUC, we have a project on the west side called the West Kauai Energy Project. We anticipate coming to the board within the next year for a license for use of water for a pumped storage hydro paired with solar project. It'll be the first of its kind in the world. Very, very capital intensive project. It's all on state lands. We'll be rehabilitating 3 state-owned reservoirs. All of the ditch systems associated with that will be, as a result, we'll be opening up ag lands for the Department of Hawaiian Homelands and assisting ADC with its ag production on the Manao Plain. We'll be rehabilitating the Pu'ulua Reservoir and maintaining all of that. There are so many community benefits with this project, but it is hugely capital intensive, and to try to pay for a project like that over a term of 30 years is just not feasible. So we just ask that that one phrase be struck and leave to the board the discretion of the license term. Now, I know there are concerns about use of the resource and changing climate conditions and the need to, relook at these licenses, but there are assurances that this can be looked at any time. We assume that our license, if we're successful in getting it, would be subject to the in-stream flow standards set by the Commission on Water Resource Management, and that could be changed at any time depending on differences in conditions down the road. So, that is our position. We hope that this bill does pass, and we hope that the committee will see fit to incorporate the amendment that we've presented. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next, we have the Office of Hawaiian Affairs, Wayne Tanaka.
Good afternoon, Chair, Vice Chair, members of the committee. Wayne Tanaka for the Office of Hawaiian Affairs. You have our testimony offering comments and just 3 amendments. I'd just like to point out that, the first 2 we think will go a very long way to resolving the apprehension about this bill, given the huge conflicts that have arisen over even short-term revocable permits for certain water diverters. And our amendments are really just about transparency and giving the state leverage in negotiating these licenses. And a lot of these amendments are actually based on existing processes that have had no problem being implemented. And so the first amendment about 30 days notice, as Earth Justice points out in its testimony, right now, if you want to lease public lands to a nonprofit, like through a direct negotiation and no public auction, you need to give 30 days notice. So it's nothing new. There's a lot of nonprofits leasing public lands. We do think, though, given the sensitivity of water, that the notice should include information regarding, whether and how the guidelines for evaluation and negotiation that are already in this bill have been applied. So in other words, when they negotiate the water license, did they look at how much water, would be taken from any stream versus how much water would remain in the stream? Did they have information about how much the licensee would have to pay to get a same amount of water from another source? Did they look at what kind of benefits will flow to the licensee and the public? This is already in the bill as guidelines. And some of the stuff like impacts to natural and cultural resources, this should already be available through the EIS process that the licensees will have to go through. And and if they don't have the information, then our amendments just say, ask that they just say that explicitly, like, no, we didn't have this information, we didn't consider it. And we think the public should minimally know that when these 15 and 30-year wire licenses are being negotiated, basically behind closed doors with no public auction. I do think the parties knowing that are negotiating these licenses, knowing that the public will have this information, will actually give the DLNR leverage. It will give, when it negotiates with what could be pretty powerful and influential entities that are putting a lot of pressure on them to give them sweetheart deals, then this state can say, hey, we need to do a due diligence because with this notice thing, things will blow up at the board if we don't. And our second amendment, that would give the state even more leverage. We're just asking and recommending that there be a supermajority or 5 out of 7 vote by the board to approve a directly negotiated license. This is actually an existing requirement, again, for other boards like a land use commission when they make decisions concerning ag lands, for example. In 99% of the time, they should have no problem getting this vote. For the small ranchers, for the small farms, even the East Maui revocable permit holdovers, like there are hours of testimony opposition. And if I recall correctly, they did get a 5 out of 7 vote.
Summarize. That would be
Okay, yeah. We just respectfully urge that you consider these amendments. We think this is a way to thread the needle on this bill and help the state move forward on water licenses and away from the revocable permits that have been so controversial. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have the Waioli Valley Tarahui, Di Kapua Ala Sprout.
Aloha, Chair Johansson, Vice Chair, members. I'm Kapua Sprout, and I'm testifying today on behalf of the Waioli Valley Tarahui. I'm actually a professor of law at the University of Hawaii at Manoa's William S. Richardson School of Law and the director of Kahuliao Native Hawaiian Law Center. I also co-teach the Native Hawaiian Rights and Environmental Law Clinics, which are courses that are offered to upper division law students where they can get experience practicing law while we provide free legal assistance to communities with the greatest needs. And this semester, we are again working with the Waioli Valley Tarahui on Kauai. This is actually the 4th semester that my students, fellows, and I have been supporting the farmers. And their situation is detailed in the written testimony upon which we stand. The bottom line is really that the Hui is a collective of small family farmers, many of whom are Native Hawaiian, with long-standing ties to their land. Most are 3rd to 5th generation Taro farmers. And their farms and lifeways were really devastated by the 2018 floods that ravaged Kauai's North Shore. Disaster recovery efforts revealed that their Native Hawaiian irrigation system that has taken water from Waioli Stream for centuries was on conservation land, which would now subject them to a slew of permitting and other requirements, including Hawaii Revised Statutes, Chapter 17158, which you're considering today. And so over the last 2 years, the farmers, with the support of my clinic, have been working diligently to comply with all of the requirements of 17158. And in fact, over the course of that time, 33 students, 3 attorneys have spent more than 4,000 hours supporting the farmers in this endeavor. So I'm here today just to ask you that if you pass out this bill, please include an exemption for traditional and customary Native Hawaiian wetland kalo cultivation that is done in a traditional manner, as is outlined in the farmer's testimony. While it has been an honor and a privilege to work with the farmers, most Native Hawaiian practitioners would not be able to comply with these requirements. We have worked very closely with Ian Hirakawa and others at DLNR, and I spoke to Ian yesterday and he is open to this amendment. I'd also note that there are others today in support of such an amendment, such as OHA, Earth Justice, and others. So I'm happy to delve into the details or answer any questions that you may have. Mahalo.
Thank you. Chair Isla, Department of Hawaiian Homelands, with comments.
We stand on that testimony with comment.
Okay, and sorry about the technical issue there.
That's okay. We're sorry too.
Okay, members, that's all the testifiers who've indicated that they would be present at today's virtual hearing to testify on HB 10. Oh, okay. Late breaking update. We also have, I'm sorry, members, Earth Justice offering comments. Lena Alale on this measure, HB 1015.
Aloha, Chair Johansson, members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to testify this afternoon. I'm going to keep my comments short. They echo in part what's already been said by OHA and Dr. Sprout about potential amendments to remedy some of the shortcomings in the bill. But very quickly, Earth Justice is a nonprofit public interest law firm with decades of experience in Hawaii water law. And we often appear before the board and Land and Natural Resources to testify on specific leases and water permits that affect the communities that we represent. So we are familiar with the leasing process that this bill is addressing. And our primary concern is the transparency and accountability. Especially as it concerns large water diversions that, as most people know, are largely holdovers from our plantation past and have had hugely negative impacts for downstream communities that also need water flow. So we believe strongly that making sure the community has the opportunity to be aware of when these leases or licenses are being considered and has the opportunity to participate, and even where they may want to, submit a competing application is important. So like OHA, we support the amendment that OHA submitted, requiring a minimum 30-day notice to the general public, as well as direct notice to the downstream individuals who would be affected by the water diversion. We also support limiting the lease term to 10 years. These long-term water leases really provide a disincentive for conservation. A lot of times there's huge waste in these ditch systems, and a shorter lease term is a more practical approach to dealing with, changing climate conditions, potential reduction in stream flow, as well as innovations in technology that will allow water users to eventually, use less water to meet their needs. We also recommend that for streams where there is no in-stream flow standard set, which is the primary mechanism for protecting public trust uses, that there be a cap of 50% of stream flow. This is precautionary. It's to make sure that the resource is conserved until the Commission on Water Resource Management is able to implement those stream flow levels that are science-based and also take consideration of community needs, including traditional and customary rights. Our fourth proposed amendment is simply to require information. A huge problem in the leasing program is that the board has not been consistent in requiring metering, engaging of both streams, alternative resources, and the actual diversions in the ditches. So there needs to be some type of limit that will make sure that this very basic information is available before a long-term lease or license is granted. And then finally, we support the exemption for in-stream traditional taro cultivation. So if you have any questions about my testimony, I'd be happy to answer them. Mahalo.
Okay, thank you. Members, now I think this completes our testifiers who've indicated that they would be here today to testify in this virtual hearing. Please note that there are also additional comments and supportive testimony proffered by additional organizations on this measure, HB 1015. With that, members, any questions? Representative Tarnas.
Thank you, Chair. A couple of questions for Mr. Hirokawa. Could you explain to us what are the public notice requirements that would be expected in if this measure were to be adopted? So what kind of public notice requirements before matter would be brought before the land board for decision making?
Well, thank you, sir, for your question. In terms of the direct negotiation, our proposed amendment, the section 1 actually outlines a public process by which the board would determine if a directly negotiated lease is appropriate. And that includes public notice and the criteria for determining, who would be potentially qualified applicants. So I'm not sure if I'm sorry, I haven't seen the testimony that, has like OHA and Earth Justice who's advocated for this change, but I would say if they, look at that criteria, I'm not sure if it would satisfy, but we do have a criteria in which, we would determine if direct lease is appropriate and it's not something that the board would unilaterally decide. So again, I would just point to the proposed section 1 in our bill.
And then once the negotiations take place and you have a license agreement, does that go back to the board for approval?
Yes, yes. So whether it is either a directly negotiated lease or a public auction, that action would have to go back before the board for final approval as well. And not to mention too, even before then, you would have the especially for the larger projects, you would have the 343 compliance, so environmental assessment, environmental impact statement. So there'd be quite a bit of public review and input into the proposed project.
Okay, and now following up on some of the other matters that were brought up, what kind of monitoring requirements would be required to make sure that we are fully informed about the amount of water that is being used and how much remains in the stream?
Well, we would implement a reporting requirement, especially for surface water, because it is limited by the interim in-stream flow standards, and a lessee would be required to report their water usage on a regular basis, whether it be monthly or quarterly, whichever is ultimately adopted. But we would keep review on how much water is used, and our lease files are public records, so the reports would go in the lease file, and anyone, not just us, could look at the file and see the usage numbers.
Okay. Moving on to the points brought up by the Kalo farmers, it was indicated that you would be open to the exemption that was being proposed. As chair of the Water Land Committee, that wasn't discussed at our hearing. Could you talk to us about that so that this committee can be informed about your position on that matter?
Yes, I think with regards to Professor Sproat and the group she's working with, they occupy a truly, I would say, unique place in this process, because not only are they small farmers, they're also taro farmers, and they're a nonprofit. So I think the idea of looking at an exemption is appropriate. I think if anything, we just have to properly craft it in a way that that doesn't be too wide, so to speak. We don't want to open the door too wide, but capture the in a very limited sense that activity.
Okay, your guidance in that language would be very important. Perhaps you could take a look at the language that was offered and provide your input to the next committee, so that you could be in unison and sync with those recommending that. And finally, I would like to ask you, Mr. Hirakawa, about how you would address the concerns from KIUC. They're looking for a 60-year commitment in order to help to basically finance this very capital-intensive project. There are other testifiers that hope that we could limit it to 10 years. So the last committee chose the middle road, and we went for 30 years. How would you address this concern of KIUC so that they could have the certainty to be able to move forward on such a capital-intensive project?
I would say that our 30-year, the proposed 30-year limit that we had was based on what we understand to be the sort of uncertainty in the climate change projections after the year 2050. So given where we are today, we feel that we thought at the time having a clean slate to look at all the licenses at around that time would be appropriate. That being said, I understand where KIUC is coming from. We could look at building in safeguards into the lease itself, especially if if it's a directly negotiated lease that allows more flexibility. And if this bill passes allowing for direct negotiation, that allows us more flexibility to impart safeguards into the lease document. So that we could achieve it that way, and also to having the board the discretion to issue 65 years. The board has the discretion to go less if it deems appropriate. So I don't think it would constrain the board too much to if KIUC's amendment were adopted, and because I think for us there's a lot of other issues in the leasing process we need to resolve with a statutory fix. So for us it's important to try and get a bill passed that can address not just one but a lot of the outstanding issues, and we can work with, if the legislature deems that that change is appropriate, we can work with that to ensure that it's still, we can still do what we need to do to manage and protect the water resource.
I'm sorry, Chair, asking your indulgence. One last question. If we were to keep it at 30 years, would there be a way to craft an agreement so that KIUC would have some certainty that they would be able to, be able to finance this project with the longer time frame that they're asking for? Because again, the 30 years was the middle way between folks who wanted just 10 years and those who want 60 years. So what would be your approach if we were to keep it at 30 years?
Well, I think, we would rely on the ability to directly negotiate a lease, with KIUC. I don't know if, we'd have to go through the process in the statute, but it's not, as it is now, it's just public auction. So you have there's no, guarantees at all. But this bill would at least allow for the direct negotiation, provided you go through the process. Now, I guess I would ask if, seeing what the bill says, if KIUC can work with us, given the parameters of the bill, to see if that'll work with a 30-year limit and the ability to directly negotiate another lease at the end of that 30 years. Of course, provided, again, all the processes are followed.
Yeah. And I don't want this committee hearing to be the negotiations, but I just wanted to make sure that we are aware, that you are aware about this concern, and we wanted to get a sense of how you'd be addressing it. There are members of this committee that are from the island, and it's a valid concern. So thank you very much. Thank you, Chair. Back to you.
Thank you, Chair Tornes.
Mr. Chairman?
Representative Har, please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. May I ask a question, please?
Yes, please proceed.
Thank you. Ms. Tokioka from KIUC?
Yes, hello, Representative Har.
Good afternoon, Ms. Tokioka. Thank you for being here. I looked at both your written testimony and I heard the verbal testimony. You just heard the exchange between the Chair of Waterland as well as with DLNR. And it is the position of DLNR that, the 30 years seems to be viable, and that perhaps with the ability to have the direct negotiations, provided you folks go through all of the everything you're supposed to, that you comply with all of the requirements, that should suffice. What is the position of KIUC with respect to that response?
Well, I think we feel that if the 30 years remains in the bill as it is written right now, that there would be no latitude on the part of the board in any type of negotiation to go beyond the 30 years. And that is very problematic for us. We've signed a 50-year development agreement with AES to build and operate and manage that hydro system for a period of 50 years. So we will be paying them for 50 years, whether or not we have the water. So that is a risk that then comes back on our ratepayers, basically, because if at the end of the 30 years, we are not successful for whatever reason there might be, it may be a small chance, but it still is a chance, then our members would be, paying for that infrastructure that, cannot be used. And, I realize this is one project, but I think, it's important enough, hopefully, to consider the amendment and the fact that this is such a huge partnership with the state. This is not just about renewable energy. This is about so many other benefits back to the state, the people of Kauai. And so it's a huge partnership, and we really feel that this, the investment is on both sides, and that it's important that we both commit long-term to this project so that it can benefit everybody that we envision that it will benefit.
So, Ms. Tokioka, can you clarify this? This is in fact a state project because it's on state land?
All of the assets will be located on state land. So there are 3 agencies involved. There are lands owned by the Department of Land and Natural Resources up in Kokee. There are lands in the middle of the project where, as the water comes down, that are owned by the Department of Hawaiian Homelands. And then down at the bottom, it's ADC. So we'll be rehabilitating, all of those assets are owned by the county, the state of Hawaii, all 3 reservoirs, the ditch system. Also included in there is modification of the diversions up in Kokee so that the IFS that was set for that stream in 2017 will be met. So we'll be responsible for making those modifications and ensuring that the stream flow maintains as it should be. So, and part of the benefit back is the irrigation water that will be provided from the reservoirs to Department of Hawaiian Homelands, opening up land that they have there in Keikaha that is currently, not able to be used. And also to ADC for their agricultural lands down in the Mana Plain. So it's a huge partnership between the 2 entities. KIUC is taking on the cost of developing it, but we really need the long-term nature of that access to the water in order to make it possible for our ratepayers to basically finance that investment over a period of 50 years or 60 years.
I see the amendment that you're requesting, and I absolutely understand, that would provide the latitude that you folks would need. Obviously, you've heard some of the testimony in opposition, but again, this is a state project, and as such, I feel like the state should be supporting, whether it's Department of Land and Natural Resources. So is there in fact what type of agreement has KIUC entered into with DLNR with respect to use of the DLNR as well as DHHL, the other state lands?
Right. We are still working through those land agreements in order to have a right of entry to do the actual construction and rehabilitation of the assets. So we are currently in the permitting phase. Okay. We don't anticipate doing any construction on the project until later in 2022. So we're in the process of securing those land agreements with DLNR and also with ADC.
I mean, I'm just thinking outside the box right now, and I don't know if Ian's still on the line, but perhaps if you, with respect to those land agreements, there can be some concession made with respect to a 60-year lease. Somehow that could be incorporated so that we're not actually interfering with the terms of this particular measure, but it gives KIUC the latitude. One last question, Ms. Tokioka, with respect to the capital costs of this project, what are we looking at? It's not in your testimony.
Right. It's we're actually the project will be paid for via a contract with AES. So I can't give you, a full price tag, but basically we will be paying AES for the energy that they produce from the solar portion of the project at 7 cents per kilowatt hour, which is actually the lowest cost solar by far on our island. And then an annual payment of $8.9 million a year for 50 years to maintain the irrigation infrastructure, the hydro resources and such. So, it's well above $100 million project. And obviously it pencils out very nicely for us and for everybody involved at 50 years or more. It's a price that will hopefully produce actually a downward pressure on rates for KIUC members as the years pass. So it's a very favorable rate, very, very competitive with all of our other renewable resources that are generating power for us. Okay, but again, if we have to pay for it in a 30-year period, the finance is completely.
You can't amortize it over 30 years. It just can't be amortized.
Right.
The capital cost can't be amortized over 30 years.
That's correct.
Ian, are you still on the line?
Sorry, yes, I am.
Okay, Ian, so what about, can you talk to the AG's office about the possibility of when you folks are negotiating the land agreements with KIUC, the possibility of having 60 years in the land agreement?
I think, yeah, we would, we can have that further discussion, knowing the concerns.
And Beth, maybe you want to talk to your council as well and see if that's a possibility. I'm just trying to think outside the box, that's all.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Representative. Members, any other questions on Representative Onishi?
Yes, for Ms. Tokioka. I had a question. So I don't know that you fully answered Rep. Har's question about, do you actually have in-hand agreements with the other partners?
We have
OHA and ADC?
We have with Department of Hawaiian Homelands, I believe those transactions are all complete in terms of the land agreements. Mr. Isla could correct me if I'm wrong. We are very close to going to ADC for the agreement that we need with them to do a solar field on a parcel of their land. And the BLNR, we've been discussing with the Department of Land and Natural Resources the necessary agreements that we need with them. I don't think that we're ready to move to conclude those yet, but these discussions are ongoing. There are a number of different permits that we will have to acquire in order to move forward from numerous different agencies. So we're, at the beginning of the process. For timeline purposes, we hope that this facility will be operational by 2025 at the latest, if all goes well. And a big portion of that is hammering out the land agreements with the various agencies. Some of them are still in process.
So the answer is no, you don't have them in hand.
Not in hand, no.
Great, okay. For DLNR, I have some questions.
Yes.
Ian, are you still there?
Yes, I'm here.
For the last few years, water rights issues that are supposed to be handled by DLNR have been a huge problem in terms of how they have been managed and how they have been executed. In this bill, I see us having to put the trust back into DLNR that they are going to adequately monitor and regulate these licenses. What assurances can DLNR give us that they're not going to fall back into the old operations that they had before that caused all of these statewide turmoil with their the current water rights that have been contested over the last decade or so?
I would say that, this is our attempt this bill is our attempt to bring clarity to the process and hopefully make it more transparent. Like, for example, the valuation methodology that we propose would give guidance to an appraiser where, back in the old days, they would just come up with a number, for water. This would hopefully provide guidance and, allow for a more transparent process to, find out that number. The watershed management plan, we're trying to, make sure that by adding clarity to that provision that, that the lessees make some contribution back to the health of the watershed that provides the water that they utilize. The Commission on Water, we've consulted with the Commission on Water Resource Management on this bill. And, we work closely with them. They're within DLNR, but we'll work closely with them on the monitoring of the leases. Like I said, we'll require reporting requirements, ensuring that, water is used for the purpose within the lease. It's not just, the old leases that allowed basically any use. This would have a much more stricter limitation on what you can use the water for, reasonable and beneficial uses. I think it's just, we look, especially over the last few years, we've learned a lot more about how to approach this. And, we hope that we're going to try to do it as best as we can moving forward. And I think this bill is an attempt to, it doesn't necessarily give shortcuts. It adds clarity and maybe some, means to sort of maybe add clarity to the process and add a little bit more, maybe different options for applicants, but it really doesn't give any shortcuts. You still have to do your, environmental assessment or environmental impact statement if needed. You still have to fulfill your obligation to DHHL for the reservation, the watershed plan. There's no really waivers here. So, I think it's about maybe improving the process, but not necessarily making it an easier process for better or for worse. And, like I said, we would do our best to do it correctly moving forward.
Well, I would tend to agree with you that this might be a more robust method in order to determine the leasing or the agreement. But I still don't see where DLNR is going to be able to regulate these leases, monitor them, ensure that they're being fulfilled. I think Representative Tarnis asked the same question and you didn't answer it. You said the licensee would provide reports. How do we know those reports are accurate? How do we know that they're truthful? The department's not intending to make any kinds of inspections and kinds of their own analysis in order to verify these reports?
Oh, of course we would. That's with any, I think with any lease that we would, not just rely on, we would do follow-up inspections, we monitor the lessees, and as best we can, see how the water is being used.
You keep saying as best we can. What does that actually mean? If you don't have the resources, you're gonna say, well, I don't have we didn't have the resources, so therefore we couldn't do it. And we didn't know that they weren't following what they were supposed to do. As best you can, I think, has been the problem with the department. I think everybody is asking the department to ensure that the use of this water is according to the plans, that it's monitored, and that the licensees are fulfilling their obligation to the state in terms of using these natural resources. Is the department proposing to do anything besides the best that they can?
Well, we're going to take every action that within our ability. I mean, we're limited by the fact is we're limited by our resources, and even now we are desperately trying to maintain the resource and funding level we have. And
well,
if we
licenses
can,
could include the requirement to cover the costs for the maintenance and the regulating of these licenses by the licensee paying for those costs to ensure that the state's interest is protected by the department and that the money is not coming out of other people's pockets, but out of the project that's being proposed.
Well, yeah, that would be covered through the lease rent.
Right, and you have that ability, am I correct? To require that.
We could, we definitely can get the lease rent and the contribution to the watershed. That's what the statute allows. As for covering any other costs, I think we would have to look at that, especially if we're able to directly negotiate a lease. Yeah, we would have to look at whatever else potentially the lessee can require. I would note though, like, in terms of the applicants that are before us now, I mean, we do have both ends of the spectrum. We have large water users such as, Mahipono and Maui, but we also have very small, very low volume water users in Kau. And, we are mindful that there are, there's a limit to what they're able to pay. And, we don't want to necessarily set up a structure that makes it, that they're priced out of a lease too. So, we're mindful of that. I mean, these are agricultural users, they're growing local food, and, we want to make sure that, try and see that we don't overly burden that kind of small ag user, water user, with too high costs as well.
So do you feel like the department does not have the ability to include cost recovery in these licenses or leases for the monitoring of these licenses and leases?
I believe again, if we could directly negotiate the lease, I think that gives us the flexibility to include or provide for those costs.
Okay.
Yes.
Chair, final question.
Sure, please proceed.
So in this issue on the term of the licenses, would the department be opposed to include a provision that if a license is more than 10 years, that that a regular 10-year review be required by the department in order to ensure that the license is still applicable?
I'm sorry, are we saying 10 years or 30? Because our amendment is for 30 years and we wouldn't necessarily.
Well, the
at.
people are asking that the leases be restricted to 10, right? KIUC is asking for 60. So would you be opposed for a provision that would require a 10-year review every 10 years if a license exceeds 10 years?
I think that'd be appropriate. Yes. I want to be clear though. I don't necessarily think we should limit the license term to only 10 years, but
I'm not saying,
but a 10-year review I think is appropriate. Yes.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you, Representative. Members, any other questions on HB 1015?
Chair, may I add a comment? This is Russell Suji.
Russell, no, I'm sorry. We're in the question and answer period. So if someone wants to
I was going to respond to a question.
If one of the members wants to directly ask you, they may, but I don't want to open up a can of worms of everybody just rebutting everybody without being asked a question by the member. So I'll ask again, members, any questions? Okay, seeing none, then we will move on to HB 1016. This is relating to the taking of marine life, and this would clarify that a valid commercial marine vessel license satisfies the commercial marine license requirement for all persons taking the marine life for commercial purposes aboard a validly licensed vessel. It also requires any person who provides fishing charter services to obtain that license. First off, we have the Department of Land and Natural Resources. Ryan Nielsen.
Good afternoon. David Sakota for Brian Nielsen. Oh, hey, Brian, go ahead.
Hi, Chair, members of the committee. We stand on our written testimony and available for questions. Thanks.
Okay, thank you and support. David Sakota, did you also want to testify since you signed up as well?
No, thank you, Chair. I'm also available for questions. I believe Brian has to step out pretty soon, so I can handle any questions if he's gone.
Okay, members, please note that on HB 1016, that's all the testifiers who've indicated that they would be present who signed up, but we do have numerous organizational and individuals providing supportive testimony on this measure. Members, any questions on HB 1016? Okay, seeing none, then we'll move on to our next agenda item, HB 499, and this is relating to lease extensions on public land. This authorizes the Board of Land and Natural Resources to extend certain leases of public lands for commercial, industrial, resort, mixed use, or government use upon approval of a proposed development agreement to make substantial improvements to the existing improvements. First off, we have Russell Suji from the Department of Land and Natural Resources in support.
Thank you, Chair. The department does stand on its testimony and support, yes, and available for questions.
Thank you. Next, we have Kevin Moore, also from DLNR, who signed up as well. Oh, I'm sorry, they didn't indicate they would be present. Thank you, Russell. Ian Hirokawa also signed up.
Yeah, they were just assisting on this one.
Okay, okay. But they knew you had it, so they left you. All right. Next, we have Daniel Kea from Brookfield Properties Retail.
Hello, Chair Johansson. Aloha, Vice Chair Kitagawa, members of the committee. Thank you very much for allowing me to offer testimony in support of House Bill 499 HD1. I'm the general manager for Prince Kuhio Plaza here on the Big Island, and we are kind of a gathering place, and we are asking that support this bill, primarily because we do have a lease coming up, and we do want to extend our lease. This would allow that, but on top of that, in my testimony, I commented about our needs for it, but I also wanted to point out that there's a great deal of businesses in the Hilo area that are all on public lands, and their leases are coming up. Although mine is a little further out, there are leases that had notated that are up within the next few years, and there are some that are up this year, which is why that we're asking and pushing so hard to have this passed this year, if possible. I'm available for questions. Other than that, we stand on our written testimony. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Next, we have the Office of Hawaiian Affairs, Wayne Tanaka, in opposition.
Good afternoon, Chair, Vice Chair, members of the committee. Wayne Tanaka for the Office of Hawaiian Affairs. You have a written testimony in opposition. We oppose this bill because it will result in public and largely ceded lands being placed in private hands for up to a century or longer. And until Native Hawaiian claims are resolved, we have no choice but to oppose these kinds of proposals. Unless there's some kind of mechanism that can recognize and protect Native Hawaiians' claims. That being said, we do have specific proposed amendments in our testimony. We have been actually talking to proponents of these extension bills about compromises that would allow them to achieve the financing goals they need, but also would safeguard Native Hawaiian claims, and as well as the public's interest in the disposition of public lands. So for example, I've spoken with proponents who have specifically said that 20 years is all they need. They don't need 40 years. And that's one thing that would go a long way to addressing our concerns, is to shorten the 40-year extension period. And we've reflected that specific language to accomplish that in our testimony, along with some other safeguards. So we respectfully ask that you please consider the amendments that we've put forward, or hold the bill. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We also have, I believe that's all the testimony of testifiers who've indicated that they would be present at this hearing to testify in HB 499. Members, please note that we also have supportive and oppositional testimony from organizations and individuals on this same measure. Members, any questions on HB 499? Vice Chair Kitagawa.
Thank you, Chair. Can I ask for Wayne Tanaka from OHA? Hi, Wayne. I have a couple of questions. Other than what Daniel Kea shared about the Prince Kuhio on the Big Island being a location where these current leases are, do you have other examples of where these leases are and on all of the different islands, just for example?
So this bill isn't isolated to just Hilo or Hawaii Island. This bill would allow any lease, any commercial, industrial, resort lease anywhere to be extended, and that's one of the reasons why we have pretty significant concern.
So probably it's other shopping locations or hotels or big kind of buildings that are already under these leases right now.
Yeah, like industrial areas like Sand Island, for example, on this island.
Okay. I'm just wondering, so if the leases aren't extended, what happens to these locations? Does OHA have envision what happens to those spaces if these leases aren't extended, or do these buildings just go empty, or what does OHA have a kind of vision of what they see happening with these spaces if leases aren't extended?
Yeah, so there's existing processes under Chapter 171 that talk about public auction and appraisal and that kind of thing. Which would give the public and other potential lessees opportunities to be able to occupy public lands. Versus I think our concern is that when you have private entities controlling the same place for such a long, like multiple generations, over 100 years at a time, that creates a sense of entitlement that can also not only foreclose Native Hawaiian claims to ceded lands, but also lead to significant pressure to alienate them. And that's something we really OHA has since its inception has been concerned about.
So for example, just one last question, Chair, sorry. For example, at like Prince Kuhio on the Big Island, say their lease wasn't extended, OHA would be okay with having another shopping center come there and fill that space, but just under a different lease, or what? I'm trying to figure out, what you kind of mean by your statement from before.
Right. So essentially, the improvements and so forth would revert back to the state. The state would appraise the property, kind of think about, what are the best uses for this land, for these lands, now that the lease is done. And then based on that, if they want to continue the shopping center approach, the brick and mortar commercial, then they would, appraise it at that amount and then go out to public auction. Yeah. And so they just follow their processes for leasing public lands.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Members, additional questions. Representative Onishi.
Yep, Chair, thank you. I have a question for Russell Suji.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, so Russell, Act 149, what was the time period for that act? There is a sunset date, right?
Yeah, I don't think it's up yet though. Is that the one that was passed a few years ago?
Yes.
We're still implementing that one, but that was limited to the certain area or district on the Big Island.
Correct.
But, I believe we're still actively moving forward, and we have some pending ones still in the hopper, in applications and stuff going before the board.
Okay, so how many applications have actually been processed and completed?
And actually completed, I believe only about 2, I think, that I recall, or at least one completed. The other one is in the process right now. There's a hang up with one of the co-lessees, so that's being negotiated right now with the other lessee. So it's a little delayed one, but there are a handful of other applicants that the staff is working on at the Hawaii District Land Office. The bill that's currently before you, though, is like as correctly reported by OHA, is one that is applied statewide, and any agency that utilizes Chapter 171, so which oftentimes are government agencies that use public lands are following 171. Some are exempt, but not everyone is exempt. And this is DLNR follows 171 as well.
Okay, so the one that was approved, is that an extension or is that a new lease?
It's an extension. That was for JH Moku.
Okay, and that with that extension, it goes beyond the 65-year maximum.
That was the bill. Yes, it allowed the extension beyond this initially the bills were the lease terms were a maximum of 65, and that act allowed for the further extension of additional 40 years, I believe. So this term here that is being asked of right now in this bill is very close. In fact, pretty much the same as what was passed, except the prior act that you're referring to, Representative, only was for that small district.
Yeah. Okay. So how many other applications are there in that district?
In that district, like I said, it's only a handful, I believe, right now. But again, there's still time, so I don't think it's no.
Okay. Chair, if I might
proceed.
For Daniel Kea.
Yes, Representative.
So, Mr. Kea, are you familiar with Act 149?
I am somewhat familiar. Notice I know about it. I don't know. I'm not well versed on it.
Okay, so as Mr. Suji mentioned in his testimony, that act, which is already in place, is pretty much the same as this. So right. Prince Kuhio would have the opportunity to take advantage of Act 149 how much longer, how much is left on your lease term? How many years?
My lease actually has 22 years left on it.
Okay, so you are way outside of the 10-year, whatever.
Sorry, 21 years, yes.
Period that this bill calls for. So for you, you're talking 11 years from now, at least, if not more.
It is, if you're, so for that act to apply, you're correct. I wouldn't be able to use it for 11 years. That is correct.
Or even this act, if this was to pass.
I believe this act does not have that same revision. It just can't have been transferred and stuff in the last 10 years.
Right. So that would still require that it's only within the last 10 years, right?
I don't believe it has the provision that it has to be within 10 years of the ending of the lease.
Mr. Suji, is that correct?
I don't recall that specific. I don't know right now as we speak. I do want to say though, Mr. Kale is actually is not under DLNR land. Yeah, so it's a different landlord.
That is correct. And we are under DHHL.
Right, right. But this act would apply to all government lands, right?
That is correct.
Anyone following 171, yeah.
Right. Okay. Thank you, Chair.
You're welcome. Thank you, Representative. Members, any additional questions?
Mr. Chairman?
Representative Har.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Russell Suji. Hi, Russell.
Hi, Representative.
How are you? Long time no see. Okay, Russell. Oh my God, Russell, I've been in office for so long, and you know we've been dealing with this bill for years and years and years and years. And I see in your written testimony, you're making certain concessions now. You know, it was always the previous chairs and vice chairs of the Waterland Committee that if we had established businesses that had, you know, invested a substantial amounts of money in infrastructure and needed to refinance their loans to make upgrades or whatnot, that you should provide them those extensions. That was always the policy of the House at that years ago. And you didn't necessarily share that same philosophy. I'm looking at your written testimony now, and you talk about the concern is that making lease extensions available on a broader basis could lead to speculators acquiring state leases, obtaining extensions, putting in the minimum 30% of substantial improvements required, and flipping the leases for a profit. The department does not believe such speculation is in the best interest of the state. Russell, so how many businesses have in fact done this?
Oh, with the passage of the prior act that Representative Onishi was mentioning, I believe there were some safeguards put in place in that one. So they have not done any of that as far as we've seen so far. But again, we're at the very inception since the passage of that act. But we just wanted to make sure. We've seen it in other situations prior to all of this legislation getting passed. When the lease term was getting towards the end, oftentimes the owner would sell the lease because there's only like 5 years left and there's no hope of getting an extension. Some people would come in and buy it and only got less than 5 years to go, but then they push to get certain legislation passed for longer terms. Yeah. So, but being that the legislature did pass the legislation the other year for this particular district in Hilo, we thought, and it seems to be working right now. And one thing we don't want to end up doing is having the situation of Uncle Billy's where the tenant who's getting towards the end of the term is without an opportunity for extension would not upkeep the property as best as if you had the extension. Mm-hmm. And so now we're in Uncle Billy's situation where we were stuck in a situation where we have the structure and it's our responsibility and it costs millions to just demolish that. And so we're trying to allow lessees who want to remain on the property, if they're willing to put back improvements into the property that extends the life, then we want to work with them, try to work with them. Yes.
Right. So isn't that why it's in the best interest to have a broader basis of extensions? Because you guys are limiting yourselves. Again, it's a disincentive for businesses to want to extend their leases or even upkeep the property if the department is not working with them on some type of lease extension. I'm intimately familiar with Uncle Billy's. We went through this, Russell. How many years have we gone through this? And so it's just exhausting to see this been going on. I mean, I've been in office for 15 years now, and we're still dealing with the same issue. So I'm just, perplexed at the fact that you're saying, well, the concern is speculation, but it's not even happening. So what that tells me is that this concern is unfounded and unwarranted because, again, I don't see a business putting all this money into the infrastructure, the improvements, whatnot, for a long-term lease only to flip it. It doesn't happen, Russell. So I feel that the concerns that the department is raising are somewhat unwarranted and are just unfair to the business owners. We have gone through this for so many years now, and we made that exception back, I think it was in 2012 for Banyan Drive, and yet we're still having to pass laws because the department doesn't seem to want to work with these business owners. And so I'm just still perplexed that we're still dealing with this, Russell. I mean, it's just been years and years, over a decade now. And it just seems to me that this concern that you continue to raise is just unwarranted. It doesn't apply. Thank you, Russell. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative, can I just say something? We are in support of this bill. But if this bill does not pass, we would not be able to, as you say, work with the other tenants outside of this district. And so we're supporting this bill to give us that ability. And please, that's what I'm asking.
Okay, thank you for that clarification, Russell. I appreciate it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Representative. Members, any other questions? Representative Onishi.
Yeah, Russell, question.
Yes.
So I know that especially in Hilo, the purchasing of leases within the purchasing of DLNR leases has been going on for many, many years by speculators, and where now there are some lessees who are basically not running their own business, but renting out properties for other businesses. And my concern about that is the person obtaining the lease, like you said, can go ahead, make the improvements, and then turn around and sell that lease to some other person who either may or may not be running their own business. But would it make sense to put in a provision that they are, if a lessee decides that they no longer want the lease, they can give up the lease back to the department without penalty, for the department to put the property out to public auction again?
I don't know, and I don't think I would support it to put it in a bill per se, but we do take cases like that on a case-by-case basis, and if it makes sense, we have recommended early termination for those that have requested that if they wanted to get out of the lease. The one thing we don't have the capacity to do though is to necessarily buy them out, for example, if they, and because it does take cash to buy them out as well. I don't.
No, I mean, it wouldn't be in the state's interest to buy them out, but
yes, if it's to terminate, Representative, we have that ability. We don't need it in the law. It's just,
I know.
But landlord
also has the ability to let the lease be assigned to another person, and that current lessee may profit from the transfer of that lease to another lessee. And the board has allowed that to happen, which has affected some of the tenants of those properties because of the higher cost for the lease, which is passed on to them. So again, I think it makes more sense that in statute, these leases cannot be transferred or sold to other lessees, and the department would have to go out again at public auction for a new lessee.
Yeah, but right now, currently, 17136 does allow the assignment or sale subject to land board approval. And secondly, the land board may, as a condition of the approval, participate in some of the, as you might say, for lack of a better term, profit or compensation being paid for the sale. And we do that, and we've been doing that for the longest of time. So, you know, it's a practice that we follow, and it's already in the statute 17136. If you think that would be adequate. Yeah.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Representative. Members, any other additional questions on HB 499? Okay, seeing none, thank you for the extensive discussion and robust discussion. We'll move on to our next agenda item. Moving away from the Waterland Committee and moving to the Economic Development Committee and some of their referrals to us. We have HB 809, and this is relating to broadband. It establishes the Hawaii Broadband Office within HTDC, as well as restructuring some of their governance. Let's see. Okay. I guess the only testifier we have present on this measure is HTDC, Len Higashi.
Thank you, Chair. We stand on our written testimony offering comments available for questions.
Okay, thank you. Okay, after confirming that of all of our proffered testimony members in support and comments, that HTDC is our only testifier on this measure. Members, any questions on HB 809? Okay, seeing none, then we'll move on to our next broadband item, HB 1191, and this is relating to broadband service infrastructure. This would establish a state version of a broadband infrastructure grant program for those unserved areas of the state. We have, excuse me, we have our first testifier, HTDC, Len Higashi.
Okay, thank you, Chair. We stand on our written comments. You know, we pointed out that there was a little unusual in establishing a program within DBED and using HTDC revolving fund, but we're available for questions. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Next, we have Felipe Monroy from Charter Communications.
Good afternoon. We stand on our written and are available for any questions. Thank you.
Thank you. We also have Ani Menon from Hawaiian Telcom with comment.
Good afternoon, Chair, Vice Chair, members. Ani Menon, Hawaiian Telecom. We stand on our written testimony providing comments and are available for questions.
Okay, thank you. Okay, that's all the testifiers of our proffered testimony who have indicated that they'll be testifying and have showed up today on HB 1191. Members, please also note on this measure, there is supportive testimony at the organizational and individual level, as well as additional comments from organizations and departments. Members, any questions on HB 1191? Okay, thank you. Seeing none, if no questions, we'll move on to our next agenda item, HB 303, leaving EDC and moving on to the Health Committee. HB 303, and this is relating to advanced practice registered nurses. This would amend provisions concerning the legal fitness to proceed examinations and criminal proceedings to include qualified APRNs. I don't believe we have anyone from the Attorney General's office, correct? Who showed up? Okay. Okay. So we have our first testifier then, DCCA, Leanne Tashima.
Thank you, Chair. We'll stand on our written testimony. Thank you.
Thank you. Offering comments.
Yes.
We also have the Hawaii State Department of Health, Behavioral Health Administration in opposition.
Good afternoon, Chair and members of the committee. My name is Dr. Bauer Smith, and I'm the Adult Mental Health Division's Court Evaluation Branch Chief, speaking on behalf of the Department of Health, and we appreciate the opportunity to testify in this matter. The department stands on its testimony in opposition and is available for questions. Thank you.
Thank you. We also have the Hawaii State Center for Nursing, Laura Reichart.
Good afternoon, Chair. Thank you for the opportunity to testify in support. I stand on our written testimony, and I also want to provide a note that we had submitted revised testimony to your office yesterday, and I also sent it to the testimony coordinator. We noted that HRS 704-404 has some updated language pursuant to Act 26 of last year. And so we offer an amendment to update Section 3 in this measure. And I'll also note that when I reviewed the testimony, HAPN has that testimony in draft as well.
Thank you. We also have the Hawaii Psychological Association, Alex Lichten, in opposition.
Good afternoon. My name is Alex Lichten. I'm the legislative chair for the Hawaii Psychological Association. Thank you for the opportunity to testify in opposition to HB 303. The main point that I want to make is that fitness to proceed examinations is a specialty area which requires further training beyond a doctoral degree or beyond certification as an advanced practice nurse. Typically, orders from the criminal courts for fitness to proceed also include orders to assess penal responsibility and dangerousness, which are more complex than fitness to proceed. So we recommend further training is needed for advanced practice nurses to do these evaluations, at minimum 1 year of an internship in forensic mental health from a nationally accredited agency, which would require the necessary training in fitness to proceed, in penal responsibility, dangerousness, forensic ethics, assessment of malingering, psychological testing, etc. Now, currently, psychologists and psychiatrists do these evaluations. These professions have an infrastructure to train people to do these. You can get pre-doctoral and postdoctoral internships, as well as coursework in graduate school in forensic mental health. I'm not aware that the infrastructure exists for nursing for this specialty areas. I'd like to point out that there is no shortage of forensic examiners available in which we need other professions to step in. There's actually a glut of examiners on Oahu, and Oahu examiners are available to do these assessments on the neighbor islands. Presumably APRNs want to do these evaluations because psychiatrists do them, and APRNs are qualified now to prescribe medications. But I'd like to point out that fitness to proceed and dangerousness, penal responsibilities, they're not medical issues. These are mental health legal issues, not medical. So in support, in short, this is outside, we feel it's outside the scope of practice for advanced practice nurses. Now, we have supported 2 other bills before the legislature right now, which would support APRNs doing counseling for death and dying, disability determinations, and we feel that is within their scope of practice. And the stakes are very high. These evaluations determine whether or not someone goes to jail or prison or a psychiatric hospital, which is, so getting them right, being accurate, having people that are well trained is essential for justice. And last thing, I used to work with Dr. Bauer Smith at Department of Health Together, we would go over applicants and see who was qualified, which psychologists and psychiatrists were qualified to be on the list of examiners. And I can tell you, even if this bill passes, right now, I don't think APRNs would actually meet the qualifications to be hired by DOH or to be added to the list of forensic examiners. We stand on our testimony. Thank you very much for the opportunity to testify, and I am available for questions.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Members, that's all of the testifiers who have showed up to testify on HB 303 who have indicated that they would be here. Please note that we also have supporting and oppositional testimony from various organizations and individuals on this same measure. With that, members, any questions on HB 303? Vice Chair Kitagawa.
Thank you, Chair. Can I have DCCA Leanne Tashima? Leanne, I have a couple of questions. How does DCCA keep does DCCA keep a list of licensed APRNs, including their specialty? Because I can see in this bill that it says these specific APRNs need to have a psychiatric specialization.
Yes, so when we issue the license to the APRNs, we include their classification. I can get you the, actually I requested it, I'm still waiting for it, list of currently licensed APRNs on neighbor islands, including Oahu, that specialize in psychiatric mental health.
Okay, so whenever APRNs get their licenses, they all have to have a specialization, or do they all have a specialization?
Yes.
And so that gets notated in the list that you guys keep.
That gets posted to, it's attached to their license, their APRN license. So there's different, obviously, national certifications, psychiatric mental health, women's health, pediatrics. There's a broader one, family nurse practitioner. So all APRNs have at least one national certification in a specific practice specialty.
Okay, great, thank you. And then one last question, how does an APRN, well, at the bottom of page 2, it says qualified advanced practice registered nurse, and you get qualified by the court for the specific evaluation ordered. So how does an APRN become qualified by the court to do that? Is that a course that they take, you know, during their APRN training, or is that something that the department does for them, or what does that entail?
I would think I'm going to have to defer to the Department of Health to see how psychiatrists and other healthcare professionals get qualified for the courts. Sorry.
Great. Department of Health, if you have that answer.
Sure. Good afternoon again. The qualification process is completed by the fact finder or the judge in the court in the specific matter. So the Department of Health reviews somebody's qualifications and based on that puts them on a list of certified examiners. But it's actually the courts who qualify a witness before they allow or they accept the expert testimony.
Okay. Okay, great. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Members, any other questions on HB 303? Okay, seeing none, then we'll move on to our next agenda item, HB 471, and this is relating to behavior analysts. This makes permanent their regulation. First off, we have DCCA, Doreen Eddy, Professional and Vocational Licensing.
Good afternoon, Chair Johansson. We stand on our written testimony in support of the motion, that measure. Thank you.
Thank you. We also have the Department of Education, Heidi Armstrong.
Hi, good afternoon, Chair Johansson and Vice Chair Kitagawa. I'm Heidi Armstrong from the Department of Education, testifying on behalf of Superintendent Kishimoto. And the department stands on its written testimony in support of House Bill 471, and we've offered comments in our written testimony. Thank you.
Thank you. We also have Hawaii State Teachers Association, Mitsuhiga.
Aloha, Chair. We completely support this bill. We would like our behavior analysts to be regulated and licensed permanently. Our teachers, sometimes when we have difficulties in the classroom with helping a student access their education, a behavior analyst is the one who we will call into our IEP meeting to help us and assist us. We want them regulated and licensed, and we want it permanent. They help us tremendously, especially with our students who have autism, and we appreciate them and hope we get your support. We really need them. Thank you.
Thank you. We also have individual testimony from Amoahiu Penny, who indicated they will also be here.
Hello. Start video. You can hear me. I'm sorry.
Good afternoon.
Hi, good afternoon. Hello, Chair Johansson, Vice Chair. I also stand on my written testimony in support of this bill. Definitely would like to ensure that there is permanent licensure for behavior analysts in order to ensure the protections of consumers, to assist our teachers and our educators and others who work with children here in the state of Hawaii. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, we also have Kristen Koba-Burt proffering support as an individual.
Thank you, Chair, Vice Chair, and members of the committee. I stand in support of my written testimony. I am also a member of the Hawaii Association for Behavior Analysis Legislative Committee, and I'm available for questions.
Thank you. Members, I believe that's all the testimony we have of testifiers who've indicated that they would be present on this measure, HB 471, again, making permanent the regulation of behavioral analysts, or behavior analysts, excuse me. Members, any questions on this measure? Okay, seeing none, then we'll move on to our next agenda item. We're back to the Energy and Environmental Protection Committee's work. HB 327, this is relating to greenhouse gas emissions. This would convene a sustainable aviation fuel task force within the Hawaii State Energy Office to develop an action plan to reduce greenhouse gas intensity in international air transportation. On this measure, we have the Office of Planning.
Aloha, Chair, Vice Chair, members of the committee. My name is Danielle Bass, the State Sustainability Coordinator, testifying on behalf of the Office of Planning here today. Just wanted to share with you that we support the intent of this measure. We offer some comments as well as proposed amendments. In December 2019, we recently published this feasibility of implications in establishing a carbon offset program report. It was distributed to all members of the legislature and is available on our office's website. We do provide comments in an effort to reduce the duplication as described in this bill. The Office of Planning is also working with the state's Greenhouse Gas Sequestration Task Force. So we do request some collaboration between this Sustainable Aviation Fuel Task Force, as well with the Office of Planning and the Greenhouse Gas Sequestration Task Force in our amendments. Finally, we note that with the many developments with the United Nations Decade of Action to be achieved by the year 2030, that Boeing has recently committed to a transition of commercial aircraft to be 100% sustainable aviation fuel by the year 2030. Thank you for the opportunity to testify on this measure. Mahalo.
Thank you. We also have the Hawaii State Energy Office offering comments.
Good afternoon, Chair, Vice Chair, and members of the committee. I'm Maria Tomei, Hawaii State Energy Office for Scott Glenn. You have our written testimony with comments. The aviation sector and emissions from the aviation sector are a very important area for development, and Hawaii has some unique ability to contribute to this. And we really look forward to working with partners and obtaining federal funding for these types of efforts. We're here to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you. I believe that's all the testimony we have of testifiers indicating that they will be present today to testify in HB 327. Members, any questions on this measure? Okay, If none, seeing none, we'll move on to our next agenda item. HB 1092 relating to carbon offsets. This establishes procedures for the DOT in consultation with the Office of Planning to assist and enable a person to voluntarily purchase a verified carbon offset for carbon dioxide emissions resulting from the person's air travel to or from a state and airport within the state. On 1092, we have Danielle Bass with the Office of Planning.
Aloha, Chair, Vice Chair, members of the committee. Again, Danielle Bass, representing the Office of Planning here today. We are providing comments on 1092. Again, wanted to remind the legislature that we did publish this report on carbon offsets. This report actually shows in the feasibility analysis that it is unlikely for the state of Hawaii to generate significant revenue through the production of offsets, and any trading of offsets credits produced within Hawaii would be limited by the state zero emission clean economy target. Offsets are a specific implementation mechanism used to foster greenhouse gas reductions, and while valuable, the uses are narrow. The state should continue to build on its existing greenhouse gas reduction policies and programs to develop the most economically viable mechanisms to facilitate reaching our zero emission clean economy target by the year 2045. Thank you for this opportunity to testify. Mahalo.
Thank you. We also have testimony from the Department of Transportation, Lynn Araki Regan, with comments. Department of Transportation. Okay, they have comments, members. We also have Blue Planet Foundation, Melissa Miyashiro.
Hi, good afternoon, Chair, Vice Chair, and committee members. Blue Planet will stand on its written testimony and support. Thank you.
Thank you. Members, that's all the testimony we have from individuals, organizations indicating that they would be here to testify. There also is organizational individual testimony, both in support and opposition. Members, any questions on HB 1092 relating to carbon offsets?
Mr. Chairman.
Representative Har.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Bass, please. Office of Planning.
Yes, Representative.
Good afternoon, Ms. Bass. Thank you for being here. Thank you for your written and your verbal testimony. That was a very fancy feasibility study. I apologize. I have not had a chance to read it yet. That said, so could you please just elaborate a little bit, though, specifically what you're saying, that what the report specifically produced with respect to the carbon offset? So you're saying we wouldn't make significant amounts of money from it?
No, not really. And what our contractor found, we did hire a greenhouse gas technical expert to help us produce this report. And that technical expert actually found that we should continue to pursue the endeavors of the zero emission clean economy target, and that this could potentially conflict with that. Carbon offsets could potentially conflict with the zero emissions clean economy target by 2045.
Oh, okay. So, so I just need to understand something. So the state's zero emissions clean economy target, you're saying that that would be the better use of our resources. We should continue on that path, because if we were to pass something like this, the carbon offsets, it actually would, in fact, it could potentially conflict.
It could. That is mentioned in our feasibility study on pages 51, 49 through 51, as well as 52 to 53 as cited in our testimony.
Okay. Is the feasibility study, is it online?
Yes, ma'am, it is. And it's also linked in our written testimony. It's available at the Office of Planning's website.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Thank you for all your hard work, Ms. Bass. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Representative. Members, any other questions on this measure? Okay, if no further questions, then we'll move on to HP 801. This is relating to mopeds, and this would prohibit retailers from selling or offering the sale of combustion engine powered mopeds beginning January 1, 2023. We have our first testifier, the Hawaii State Energy Office.
Sorry, this is Chris Junker on behalf of the Hawaii State Energy Office. We stand on our written testimony with comments and are here to answer any questions you have.
Thank you. We also have Hawaiian Style Rentals LLC, Nathan Bingham, in opposition.
Hey, good afternoon. I've owned and operated Hawaiian Style Rentals and Sales in Waikiki for the past 16 years. We specialize in two-wheeled and three-wheeled moped rentals. The island-wide distributor of genuine line of scooters where we sell new and used mopeds in Honolulu and supply neighbor island dealers with mopeds on Maui, Hawaii Island, and Kauai. I oppose House Bill 801. The statement about mopeds with factory mufflers often being many times louder than larger motorcycles that have greater engine displacement and robust exhaust baffles is simply untrue. None of the mopeds we rent or sell have loud mufflers than a motorcycle. The mopeds that are creating the noise pollution are an extremely small group of individuals who knowingly break the law and are making our industry look bad. There are still a small percentage of those who modify their mopeds at home, but they often are modifying mopeds that were built back in the 90s and the early 2000s. In early 2007, Act 200 came into law requiring all mopeds to receive an annual safety check and registration. Before this law, mopeds were classified as bicycles and had a one-time permanent registration. Part of the new safety check rules in Act 200 require the exhaust to be no louder than 100 decibels at half throttle. A normal moped's decibel reading will never read that high and should hover around 80 dBs at half throttle. The current legislation is working. Since Act 200, there have been no new shops open that specialize in building performance mopeds, and there have been countless shops that have shut down. The noise polluting mopeds that this bill is trying to get off the road are an extremely small percentage of owners who find pleasure in modifying older mopeds. This issue really lies in the enforcement by the safety inspectors, the police, and the communities affected. If this bill does become law, it will put many small local businesses on all islands that have nothing to do with noise pollution out of business, make owning a moped more expensive / less desirable, and the unwanted noise pollution will still persist. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, and thank you for your testimony. We also have Blue Planet Foundation, Melissa Miyashiro, in support.
Thank you, Chair. We'll stand on our written testimony.
Thank you. We also have Moped Doctors, Inc., Robert Manabo Sato.
I know Robert had to go to work. He
Okay.
couldn't wait, so he has
Yeah.
stand as testimony though.
My thanks to everyone who has waited till the end of the agenda. And, thank you for your patience. Thank you for that clarification. Just for the record, Moped Doctors, Inc. was in opposition. We also have Apex Motorsports LLC, Danny Shin, in opposition.
Hey, how's it, guys? Thank you for having us. This whole thing just caught me off guard again. I mean, in the future, if you guys are trying to pass this law, is there any way that we could have a notice or anything like that? Because I didn't get no notice in just like in 24 hours I got this notice. And there is so many more moped companies or riders or anybody who oppose this bill because, like the gentleman said, Nathan said, our four-stroke is very quiet. The state allows 100 decibels, less than 100 decibels. The stock four-stroke moped comes out average about 70 decibels. And like what Nathan and everybody else is talking about is the motorcycles. Motorcycles are way louder. And you guys banned the two-stroke. The state banned the two-stroke about 5 years ago. And you guys implemented the safety check station, which my station number is 1916. And we banned the two-stroke. It's just a small group of two-stroke engine riders that is still modifying because they got grandfathered in this. So for you guys to put this bill out, you guys are going to take out so much small business, especially me and the small moped companies that are just selling four-stroke, and they're so much quieter. You get about, 100 miles per gallon. And it's the best commuting for our college students, to ride around. And four-strokes are so quiet compared to the two-stroke. And two-stroke is banned, like Nathan said. To do this, to take this two-stroke out of our market is the safety check station, which is we're doing, and also the HPD got to enforce this law. It's not our job to do. We comply with you guys' rule every time. We only had to have a bicycle registration many, many years ago, and you guys banned that, and we got to do a safety check and a license plate now. And we're complying with all this rule you guys are giving us, and you guys are trying to take us out and enforce it and close my business up. Doesn't make any sense to me. And this last minute warning that I somehow got, I never knew anything about this bill. So in the future, I would like to know if this bill is coming, or if you guys could email us and just to keep us posted, you know? Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. We also have, I believe that's our last testifier who's indicated that they would be present. Members, any questions on HB 801?
I do. So how do we get notified?
I'm sorry, excuse me, Mr. Shin. As a matter of decorum, this time is for members to ask questions of the testifiers, not for anyone to ask questions who wants to participate. So I thank you very much for your testimony. I think it was received loud and clear, but this question and answer period is for members to ask testifiers. So members of the legislature, any questions? Okay, seeing none, then we'll move on to our next agenda item. And again, we thank you to the business owners who have spent so much time waiting to testify. We appreciate what you have said. Next, we'll move on to HB 393. This is relating to ground transportation. This would establish goals for the state to reduce emissions vis-a-vis climate change and build energy efficiencies across all sectors. The major tenet of this bill would prohibit the sale of new motor vehicles solely powered by fossil fuels and designed for personal use, beginning by a blank date. And that work was, the date was blanked out by the previous Energy and Environmental Protection Committee. We have our first testifier, DCCA, Keaton Kleinhaus.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Chair. Board's written comments, and I'm available for any questions. Thank you.
I'm sorry that I mispronounced your name. Thank you for being here. Next, we have the Hawaii State Energy Office.
Hello, this is Chris Junker for the Hawaii State Energy Office. We stand on our written testimony with comments and are available for questions.
Thank you. Next, we have Blue Planet Foundation.
Thank you, Chair. Melissa from Blue Planet Foundation. You have our written testimony in strong support, and just want to thank you for hearing this measure. We see this as a really critical conversation, particularly because Hawaii doesn't currently have any strong policy framework in place to address our what have been increased emissions from the transportation sector. So we think that rather than just kind of continuing on the business as usual track, that it's really time to set a framework in place. And in this case, follow the lead of places, like California that have decided that, it's time to phase out fossil fuel transportation. So happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have the Hawaii Auto Dealers Association? We do. Dave Rolfe, are you there?
Yes, I am. Thank you, Chair and Vice Chair and members of the committee. I think the video started there. I think
It is.
that's on.
You're doing just fine.
Sure. We appreciate the opportunity to make comments on this. I'm with the Hawaii Automobile Dealers Association. The subject matter committee struck the date out of the bill, and that was something that we had requested, that actually the whole concept of banning vehicles be stricken from the bill. That's because if you ban a vehicle unilaterally in Hawaii only, people will just go to other states and buy them and bring them in. Furthermore, if you ban a new vehicle like this bill proposes, people will just simply buy older vehicles, and it will be counterproductive to the whole purpose of the bill. So while indeed we're offering just comments on this bill, our comment is that it would send buyers to other states. That would be problematic for businesses here. There'd be a loss of jobs, and it would be just a loss of tax money, and all around just wouldn't work, a unilateral ban. Secondly, the bill has a laudable goal of moving all vehicles to 100% fossil fuel free, and we support that. It's just a matter of the timeline and figuring out how that works. The 2045 date we asked be deleted because it would mean that a car would have to, all the cars sold in 2025, starting just 4 years from now, would have to be 100% electric, and that just is illogical, and there aren't enough cars produced by the manufacturers to make us go from selling 5% of our vehicles now to 100% of our vehicles in 4 years. That's a 20-fold jump in 4 years, and it's just not logical. There is a transition we're putting together a roadmap. We want to work with everybody on that. Every stakeholder on this hearing, we want to work with, and we have some great ideas as to how to move us forward rapidly. Thanks for letting us testify, and we hope that we can not have bans or set dates that we just can't meet.
Thank you very much, Dave. Appreciate it. Do we have the Alliance for Automotive Innovation? We do. Tiffany Ajima or Kurt Augustine?
Hi, Chair, Vice Chair, members of the committee. Good afternoon. I'm Tiffany Yajima here on behalf of the Alliance for Automotive Innovation. I have Kurt Augustine also with me at this hearing. Kurt is the Director of Government Affairs for the Auto Innovators out of California, and would be happy to testify in this measure. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Excuse me. Pardon me, Chair. Good afternoon, Chair and members. My name is Kurt Augustine, as Tiffany said. And we have concerns with this bill with two portions of it that, and I'll echo some of the remarks that Mr. Rolfe made. Is establishing a date certain when new cars have to be sold as only ZEV vehicles without a comprehensive plan to get there is something that's difficult for us to support. A state who's prepared to ban new car sales that are only ZEVs is going to have an infrastructure plan. It's going to have the ability to have rebates for consumers for those new higher costs. Going to have building code issues to address this. So that's something that has not happened in most states. And just a unilateral banning of it at a certain date is without that plan is surely to fail. Secondly, our objection about the 2045 is much the same as what you heard from Mr. Rolfe, but I'll expand on the California program because there is much discussion about what has happened here in California. Governor Newsom issued an executive order directing the California Air Resources Board to develop a plan to have the vehicles that are only zero emission vehicles to be sold by that date. His direction includes having various off-ramps and benchmarks that must be met before that ban could take place. Also, within that ban is the allowable use of plug-in hybrid electric vehicles, which is a combination of both gasoline and battery-powered vehicles. So even the California plan, the most aggressive in the nation, contemplates allowing some limited electric and gasoline-powered vehicles on the road. In fact, their estimates are by 2045 that 1/3 of the vehicles still remaining on the roads in California will be powered by gasoline. So it's for these reasons that we have strong concerns with this bill, would like to continue to work on an overall plan for successful ZEV integration, and I am happy to answer any questions for you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Members, that's all of the testifiers who have indicated that they would be present here today to provide testimony in HB 393. Please also note that we have, as we do on many of the other measures, numerous individuals and organizations that have provided testimony in support or opposition. With that, members, any questions on HB 393? Okay, if there are none, actually I have some. Dave Rolfe with the auto dealers.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. You know, I know I'm more familiar with sort of electric vehicles in the sedan line, but are there, because the scope of this in Section 3 is personal, family, or household use vehicles, are there minivans, trucks, other cars that might otherwise be personal, household, family cars? Are there essentially non-fossil fuel powered equivalents of sort of all of what might normally be in a family's garage at this time?
Well, first of all, I drive an electric vehicle also, but it's a hybrid vehicle. So I've really enjoyed the best of both there. it has very high mileage too on its gasoline. But I think your question is, are there any trucks? Are there any vans? Are there any other cars other than vehicles other than private cars that are coming out? And Ford just came out today saying they're making their F-150 available in an electric version in the middle of next year. But they're moving commercial vehicles over there first because commercial vehicles know how much mileage they use every day. Did I get the question why right? I'm sorry, I was trying to.
I'm just wondering in terms of, for the average family in the feasibility, if this were to be implemented, in terms of consumer choice, besides sedans, are there non-fossil fuel powered equivalents, either in production or in design for things like minivans, trucks, etc.?
Yes, there are. In fact, General Motors came out and said that they're going to have 30 models worldwide and 20 models by 2025, but they're also going to sell the vast majority of their vehicles as gasoline vehicles in 2025. But yes, you're going to have electric trucks, you're going to have electric SUVs, electric station wagons, just every kind of model available that you can imagine. But it will take an evolution, not a revolution. You can't just snap your fingers and make this happen. And that's why we said we're working on it. We're excited about it. We call the process joy. And we want to work with everybody in helping make that transition. We know the number of years it's going to take. We know how we can accelerate that. If we can work with everybody without bans, without setting a date that we can't meet, we'll all work on this together and have a very satisfying experience. And everybody that's testified, I look forward to working with.
Okay. Thank you very much. Members, any other questions on this measure?
Representative Harness. Thank you very much. Just a question, perhaps Melissa, you could respond just from your perspective. What do you think about the timeline that's reasonable for conversion of fossil fuel vehicles?
Yeah, sure. Happy to share. I mean, I think as the remarks that Mr. Rolfe shared about this, this transition that's already underway, it's something that we certainly believe is possible. And I think within this bill, there's kind of two approaches to accelerating that transition to a clean transportation future. One is actually quite not as, I guess, broad in scope as it seems. So the original version was setting a target for a specific date to phase out the sale of vehicles solely powered by fossil fuels. So it actually would allow, hybrid vehicles to still be on the market at that time. So that's actually perhaps a more measured approach. And really the 100% renewable by 2045 for transportation, would encompass the transportation system as a whole. And it's certainly something that, that we need to do. And we need to be, drawing a line in the sand and saying that we need to transition our entire transportation system away from fossil fuels, because the policies that are in place currently haven't done that. And we've seen, a steady increase in emissions. So we need to do something differently. And yeah, we do think that the 100% renewable transportation goal is possible. And it also, I mean, we saw something similar with setting the 100% renewable electricity goal. It really aligned planning and fostered collaboration. And now stakeholders are coming together to figure out, what's the best pathway, what's the most equitable pathway to reach that 100%. And we think that something similar can happen, on the transportation side, and it's going to encourage markets and really, there's another whole layer to this conversation around charging infrastructure. And we have a long way to go there too, but really, again, drawing that line in the sand will help align our planning efforts to actually make it happen.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Representative Harness. Representative Haar, did you have a question also?
I do. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Rolfe, can I have you back on, please?
Thank you, Representative Haar.
Good afternoon, Mr. Rolfe. Nice to see you. Happy New Year. Give your wife my best.
Thank you.
Okay, so Mr. Rolfe, I want to, this is an issue for me because I recently purchased a minivan. I have twins, and so I purchased a minivan, and we looked at the electric vehicles and we looked at the hybrids, and the cost was quite significantly different.
Right.
So can you speak to that? I mean, people continue to say, oh no, Representative Har, the costs are going to come down as the production ramps up. It's, supply and demand. But I was shocked at how much more expensive it was for the EVs or the hybrids. And let's be very clear. I've owned a hybrid since 2007. I had a Camry hybrid for many years. Very good car. But that said, in terms of looking at the cost, solely at the costs, it was a much more expensive price tag. So can you please speak to that? Because what if we have constituents who are not able to purchase, the Teslas or the more expensive, the EVs, or not, they're priced out of that range.
Thank you, Representative Har. That's one of the major sufficiency issues that the electric vehicles haven't crossed yet. By the way, the Pacifica van is a wonderful electric vehicle. The Chrysler folks produced that, and they're making those into autonomous vehicles, by the way. But it's much more costly than a combustion vehicle van. And that's part of the pickle. In fact, of the vehicles sold this year, the electric vehicles sold this year, 80% were in one brand, a luxury brand. It's interesting that the purchasers of electric vehicles are folks who are just more well-to-do. If you look at where the locations are for those purchases, it's still a cost issue. And that's one of the pickles with creating a ban right now, is you'd be forcing people into trying to purchase vehicles that just don't meet their needs. And that's like going skydiving without a parachute. You need to know how things are going to work out. And that's why we need a plan. We've offered that roadmap, want to work with everybody on it, but mathematically you can't get to 100% fossil fuel vehicles by 2045, and you would send all the purchasers offshore if you put a ban on them right now. So that's why we have comments about this bill, but we sure appreciate that question of yours. It brings up the price issue. It's still a significant thing in the electric vehicle category. And we wish you well on your new car purchase, by the way, and with your twins.
Thank you, Mr. Ralph. I think, again, I did look at the Chrysler Pacifica at the EV, and it was significant. It was out of our price range, so we just couldn't afford it.
Yes,
I think that will continue to be an issue for many local residents. Another thing, though, I don't think that's been, addressed here is the fact that, and again, I'm a proponent of electric vehicles and hybrid vehicles, but that said, nobody's talking about the fact that they create a significant amount of waste. The batteries, they're much heavier cars. They have much more of an impact on our roads. They actually produce more road damage than the combustion vehicles. Unfortunately, we don't have anybody here from the energy sector to talk about, or the environmental sector with respect to the recycling of these car batteries and what happens at the end of the life of those batteries, etc. But I thank you very much, Mr. Ralph, for your testimony. Again, give your wife my best.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Representative. Members, any other questions on HB 393? Okay, thank you. Seeing none, then we'll move on to our second to the last agenda item. HB 860, and this is relating to rooftop solar installation, and beginning January 2022, this would prohibit the issuance of building permits for new single-family dwellings that are part of a development of 20 or more dwellings that don't include rooftop PV generating systems unless a variance is granted. We have our first testifier, the Hawaii State Energy Office.
Good afternoon, Chair, Vice Chair, and members of the committee. I'm Maria Tomei, Hawaii State Energy Office for Scott Glenn. You have our written testimony with comments, and we're here to answer questions. Thank you.
Thank you. We also have Melissa Miyashiro from Blue Planet Foundation. Excuse me.
Thank you, Chair. We'll stand on our testimony.
Okay, thank you. In support. Not sure if you've stuck with us all this time, Beth Tokioka from the Kauai Island Utility Cooperative in opposition.
Yes, I'm still here.
Oh,
Thank
you
you.
get points for
Thank you. Still here.
Thank you for being with us.
Absolutely. So we've submitted testimony in opposition to this bill, but just to clarify, we do appreciate and support the effort to expand rooftop solar. We have about 31 megawatts of rooftop solar installed on Kauai presently. What we object to is the portion of the bill that actually prescribes the size and type of system, that it be a 5 kW system with a battery. And the reason for that is that, presently, we offer our members a number of options relating to rooftop solar. So if someone wants to install a system, they'll look at various factors, including their budget, their home, how much energy they use is a big factor. Our average residential user consumes roughly 500 kilowatt hours a month of electricity, and a right size system for that customer would be roughly 2.5 kilowatts, so half the size of what's being asked for here. So, our concern is that this bill, in prescribing the size and type, some members don't install a battery for whatever reason, possibly because of price, but we feel that should be the member's choice. And so we feel that as currently written with these requirements, it does have the effect of curtailing choice for the customer. And we would recommend that portion of the bill be taken out. And I'm happy to answer any questions.
Okay, thank you. We also have Robert Harris from the Hawaii PV Coalition in support.
Thank you, Chair, Vice Chair, members of the committee, for the opportunity to testify in strong support of HB 860, particularly during such a long hearing. My name is Robert Harris. I promise to try to be concise.
No, that's
Let me address the.
You've waited a long time. Don't rush yourself.
Well, I will still try to be concise out of respect to the committee. Let me try to address, or let's address the ultimate question: will this impact the cost of housing in Hawaii? There are three reasons why the cost of housing and living in Hawaii will go down if this bill were to be passed. First, California, in passing a similar requirement, conducted a statewide study and determined, regardless of property location or size of the home load, that the average residential monthly cost would go down significantly by including rooftop solar on all new homes. This is based on customers having to pay significantly less for the cost of electricity, which currently represents about 10% of a resident's monthly costs. The conclusions in California would only be more true in Hawaii, where electricity costs are higher and our solar resource is greater. Second, addressing the upfront costs. Solar developers in California and have been offered in Hawaii to pay home developers significant sums of money for the opportunity to install solar on new homes. A large cost of rooftop solar today relates to both sales and permitting, and the opportunity to lower these costs have been passed back to the home developer. Developments in California and Hawaii have been offered approximately $2,000 to $3,000 per home, which, for example, for a 10,000 home subdivision results in a $20 to $30 million reduction in housing costs. This profit can be offered back to customers in the form of lower cost housing. The typical new home owner will either get a lease or PPA for the solar system, which does not impact mortgage costs and guarantees the solar system performance, or if they choose, they can include and roll the solar system into the cost of the mortgage. Third, new subdivisions create tremendous utility costs for both new and replacing existing infrastructure. For example, one subdivision being developed in Oahu is triggering nearly $10 million in new substation costs. Costs are borne by all homeowners on Oahu. These types of costs could be avoided if new homes were built with solar and storage. As Oahu and neighbor islands see significant development growth, the opportunity to avoid hundreds of millions of dollars in costs are significant, as well as to build 21st century homes that are clean, self-sufficient, and resilient to hurricanes and power outages. I know I've gone through a lot, and I appreciate your attention and patience. Let me just leave you with this. These types of requirements are common as new technology is developed. At one point, homes were built without electricity, and wise legislatures, such as yourself, required new homes to be built with utility hookups. This was done to protect future homeowners from having to pay significant costs later in time to get electricity. Seems like a very non-controversial concept today, but the time of passage is probably as contentious as this concept is here. Similarly here, we have the opportunity to lower the cost of housing, and as well as make sure that we're building a cleaner, more resilient Hawaii. Thank you for the opportunity to testify, and I'll be available for any questions you might have.
Thank you. I believe that's all of the testifiers who have indicated that they would be present in this virtual hearing to testify on HB 860. With that, members, any questions on HB 860?
Sure.
Representative Onishi.
Yes, Mr. Harris. I had a question. What is the comparable cost for a 3-bedroom two-bath, single-family home in California compared to Hawaii?
It depends significantly on where you're talking about. In the Bay Area, they are very comparable to the cost of housing in Hawaii. Obviously, there are rural locations in California, which are probably comparable to the price of housing on the Big Island, for example.
Okay, so this survey that was done in California, is that a statewide survey or was that a survey in particular regions?
It was a study, to be clear, and it was for the entire state of California, and they exactly looked at the locational issues, whether or not there'd be impact based on some areas are far more sunny, have much higher electricity costs. Some areas are less sunny and have less electricity costs. So they really did try to look at all that, and they found, again, that was 100% of California. And again, to be clear, they do have some exceptions, much like this bill is proposing exceptions for individual units that might have specific unique characteristics. But again, they're really looking at the cost of electricity and the ability to reduce that cost of electricity.
So in general, you're saying that the average cost for that structure in California is equal to that same structure in Hawaii, no matter what location it's built at?
Let's put it a different way. I think it's the cost of installing solar onto the house and looking at it from a customer perspective of what are they going to have to pay per month. And so, even assuming the cost of solar is the same across the state, that the electricity costs would be reduced on a monthly basis in a way that's essentially showing a net benefit to all customers.
Well, you talked about the credit that the homeowner would receive or the developer would receive. And that's about the same, no matter if you're in California or Hawaii. But if the cost of the dwelling and the cost of the solar is more expensive in Hawaii, that $2,000 or $3,000 does not equate to offsetting the costs for the development. So it's not an equitable solution for Hawaii if our costs are 10, 15, maybe even 20% higher to build the same structure in Hawaii versus California.
Yeah, so let me be clear. Sorry, my children are trying to get attention. Let me clear that there are two different points that are being addressed. So one, California is simply assuming the new home developer or new homeowner would pay for the full cost of the solar system, and then looking at how much they'd save on a monthly basis, rolling that into mortgage, expecting the average cost of the solar system and the average cost of financing a mortgage, and then looking at how much they'd save on a monthly basis thereafter. And that's solely what the California study looked at. I made a second point that one of the primary objections that we've heard isn't so much, hey, we're lowering the monthly cost, but it's raising the upfront cost of purchasing a home, which might impact people's ability to get a mortgage. So a $1 million home might go up to $1 million and $30,000. And that might impact somebody's ability to get a mortgage. And so I was offering specifically here that the cost of housing doesn't have to go up. And in fact, the example in California has been, most solar developers have been offering money for the opportunity to install. So the home developer sees no cost for installing the solar, as well as a payment between $2,000 to $3,000, which across a large subdivision can be significant. That could be in the millions of dollars of reduced housing costs. So two different things. One is talking about the monthly cost to customer, which is probably what most homeowners care about the most, is what is it going to cost me on a monthly basis? And in addition, the upfront cost of the house itself.
Okay, so.
And then the third point, just briefly, was sorry, Representative, please go ahead.
Say between California and Hawaii, right? Like our average costs for electricity in Hawaii must differ significantly from California.
It is significantly higher, which means that the results in California would be even more true in Hawaii. We are, the highest cost of electricity in the country, about 2 to 3 times the national average.
Right, that's correct. But it would also cost us more to install solar than in California.
per watt costs are pretty comparable to California.
I'm not talking about, I'm talking about the initial investment to put solar here.
Correct. So sorry. I mean, all this stuff is tracked on a national basis. The cost of installing solar in Hawaii and California isn't significantly different. Again, Hawaii is a little bit more expensive, as one would expect, but that's not going to be a significant factor in this. In the California study, which again is just looking at how much the residents save. Residents would save even more in Hawaii.
Okay. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Representative. Members, any additional questions?
Hi, Chair. I think I have a
Senator
question.
Morikawa.
If Beth is still on, Beth? I
Yes.
didn't see any testimony from, is it Hawaiian Electric here on Oahu?
Yes.
But since you bravely submitted testimony, when on Kauai, when there is a whole lot of solar being installed on people's houses, how does the electrical company deal with that? Don't they have to kind of right size it so they are able to take all that energy in?
Yes, thank you for the question. We currently have way more solar on our system during daytime hours than we can take. So in what I was alluding to, the options that we offer to our customers is one of the options is a right size option. So we really encourage customers to install PV of a size that meets their own needs during the day and does not export to the grid, because we really do not need that extra export at this time. So again, for a typical house on Kauai, a right-sized system that would meet their daily needs would be roughly half of what's being asked for in this bill. So I don't know why we would, force an oversized system. There are other options though. If someone does want to oversize, they can. They have to, we recommend that they install what's called a curtailment meter, because there are many times when we can't take the excess solar, so we have to cut off the export. And if they have installed a curtailment meter, they still can use their own generation to meet their own load, but they just can't export. So again, we have many choices here. So our concern is just when you have a one size fits all, and particularly the size that's described in this bill, when we're looking at our customers, it's much larger than the average customer would need here on Kauai. So thank you. I hope that answered the question.
Thank you so much for that information.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Representative. Members, any other questions on this measure? Okay, seeing no further questions on HB 860, then we will move on to our last agenda item, HB 1312. This is relating to intellectual property. And this requires the University of Hawaii to include in certain employment agreements that address intellectual property rights a condition requiring the employees to make a good faith effort to sell or license intellectual property to a farmer or ag producer within the state. On this one, we have one testimony from the University of Nicholas Comerford from CTAR.
Thank you, Chair, Vice Chairs, committee members. Nick Comerford, I'm the Dean of the College of Tropical Agriculture and Human Resources. First, I'd like to say I'm honored to have this position in the program because I know you always save the best for last. Relative to the bill, while we certainly support the intent, we oppose Section 2. We oppose it for the reasons that are given in our testimony. So we stand on our testimony, and I am available for questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dean. Members, that's all our testifiers on this measure. Any questions on HB 1312? Okay.
Real quick, Chair.
Representative Onishi, please.
Dean, I had a question. I mean, doesn't the university generally have a policy in regards to intellectual property?
Yes, the university has an executive policy, EP 12-101 to 105. But in addition to that, relative to this bill, it also conflicts with the faculty union university contract.
So why was this singled out to CTAR?
My reading of the bill, Representative, is that it really reflects the our plant breeding program. And it's our plant breeding program that has been crucial in keeping some aspects of the agricultural industry viable. I would say years ago, there might have been some poor actors in the program. I know when I came 4 years ago, there has not been any of that kind of activity. And our approach in the college is that we only breed for the state of Hawaii. And if our materials are not appropriate for the different industries in the state of Hawaii, then we might consider then licensing them outside the state. But our goal, our purpose is only for the state of Hawaii.
Thank you, Dean. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Representative. Members, any other questions on HB 1312? Okay, seeing none, my thanks to everyone for testifying. We will recess for decision making. Recess. Okay, reconvening our Tuesday, February 11th, 2 p.m. hearing, excuse me, our Thursday, February 11th, 2 p.m. hearing in room 329, this meeting of the Consumer Protection and Commerce Committee. First off, we have agenda item HB 304 relating to deferred deposits. I'm going to defer decision-making to a Tuesday, 2 p.m. agenda, February 16th, also in this room. So we'll come back to this measure for decision-making on February 16th at 2 p.m. Similarly, HB 1192 relating to consumer protection. This measure will also be deferred for decision-making to February 16th at 2 p.m. here in this room, 329. So first two agenda items, deferred decision-making to a time certain. Again, February 16th at 2 p.m. in this room. Next, HB 943 relating to non-depository trusts. The recommendation would be to move this out with an amendment, two amendments, including inserting a defective date of January 1, 2050 and making technical non-substantive amendments. And for those watching, particularly if you're not normally testifying at the legislature, just want to note that the reason we changed the defective date or changed the effective date of the proposed legislation is deliberately to ensure that it can't pass in its current form and it needs and requires more discussion. So it's just a legislative technique to ensure more discussion. Members, any questions on the recommendation? Okay, thank you. Seeing none, Vice Chair for the vote, please.
The recommendation of the chair is to pass HB 943 with amendments. Chair and Vice Chair vote aye. Representative Aquino. Representative Har? Aye. Representative Hashem? Representative Kong? Representative Mizuno? Representative Morikawa?
Aye.
Representative Onishi?
Aye.
Representative Tarnas?
Aye.
Representative Matsumoto?
Aye.
Chair, your recommendation is adopted.
Thank you, members. Next on HB 445 relating to increasing the estate tax. I think this is a good discussion to be having, but I'm concerned that the $1 million threshold listed in this bill would ensnare a large percentage of sort of middle-class families and folks who belong to essentially middle-class estates, just because most home values approach that $1 million threshold currently. But I do think it's an important discussion to be having. I would like to blank out the amount, so blanking out the $1 million threshold, and keep this moving so that we can see if there is a more appropriate number and mechanism than we have in the current law, including a defective date of January 1, 2050. And I'd also like to note DOTAX's concerns in the committee report and the need for ultimately, should this measure pass, putting in an implementation date that comports with tax years. Members, any comments or questions on HB, the recommendation on HB 445?
Chair?
Representative Onishi.
Yes, I really believe that the federal government's going to be taking a look at the tax bill that was passed under the previous administration. And realizing that that tax bill significantly increased this threshold in the way the language exists. I would think that their adjustment would then lower that threshold again for Hawaii. So I'm going to be voting at this time with reservations.
Okay, thank you.
Chair, sorry.
Representative Khan.
Just because of the district that I represent, that it would not be advisable for me to support this bill, so I'll be in opposition.
No problem, thank you. Members, any other comments or questions before we take the vote? Okay, seeing none, Vice Chair for the vote, please.
The recommendation of the chair is to pass HB 445 with amendments, noting the presence of all members and the reservation vote from Representative Onishi. Are there any other reservations? Noting the no vote from Representative Kong, are there any other no's? Chair, your recommendation is adopted.
Thank you. Next, HB 113. This is relating to measurement standards. This already has a defective date, so the recommendation is to pass this measure unamended and pass it as is. Members, any comments or questions? Okay, seeing none, Vice Chair for the vote, please.
The recommendation of the chair is to pass HB 113 HD1 as is, noting the presence of all members. Are there any reservations? Are there any noes? Chair, your recommendation is adopted.
Okay, thank you. Next on HB 1015, and my thanks to Chair Tarnas for just his guidance and
We missed one.
oh, thank you. I just wanted to thank Chair Tarnas for everything, including his thoughts.
You're so kind.
On property definitions. No, excuse me, members, I skipped HB 181, which is relating to the definition of property, and this would include potentially intellectual property or property stored in an electronic medium in the definition of property. I think the committee is sensitive to the constraints of the Honolulu Police Department, and so we want to take their amendment, which would exclude intellectual property and just define, change the definition to include just property stored in an electronic medium in this bill for the definition, which the prosecutor ultimately said might accomplish the same end without some of the complications, workability issues that HPD raised. Also want to defect the date to January 1, 2050 and make technical and non-substantive amendments. Members, any comments or questions? Okay, thank you. Seeing none, Vice Chair.
The recommendation of the chair is to pass HB 181 with amendments, noting the presence of all members. Are there any reservations? Any noes? Chair, your recommendation is adopted.
Thank you. And now, thank you to Chair Tarnas. We'll be addressing the waterland portion of today's agenda on HB 1015 relating to the disposition of water licenses by the Board of Land and Natural Resources. I think we had a lot of great discussion. I did receive prior concurrence from Chair Tarnas and advice on this. So we will be including an exemption for Kalo as requested by some of the advocates in this measure. Additionally, I do want to note in the committee report, I think a significant issue has come up with respect to how DLNR is interacting with the stakeholders, and we'd highly encourage them to keep working on this issue and this particular measure to ensure success. So members, I'll raise a defective date. The recommendation is just to insert an exemption for Kalo farming and practices. Members, any comments or questions on
Chair?
amendments? Yes, Representative Onishi.
Yes, I appreciate the hard work that you and Representative Tarnas have done on this bill. I think it makes it a much better bill, but I still have concerns over the regulatory regime that DLNR needs to have in place in order to ensure that the licenses and the leases that they've issued for water are adhered to. So I'll be voting with reservations for now.
Okay, thank you very much, Representative. Members, any other comments or questions?
Yes, Chair.
Representative Morikawa.
I'm gonna be voting reservations because I'm just not sure how this will affect that really fabulous project that's gonna occur in my district. Thank you.
Yeah, completely understandable. Thank you, Representative Morikawa, and your work on behalf of Hawai'i. Members, any other comments or questions?
Mr. Chairman.
Representative Har.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. With respect to this bill, thank you again for the recommendation in terms of exempting Kalo. That said, I do share the same concerns as Representative Morikawa. I do think that the 30-year limit in the bill that is proposed by DLNR creates a major problem. And I just think that, at the end of the day, it's really a state project. It's on state lands. It benefits all of the state stakeholders. And so it's good for the environment. It's good for the ratepayers. This is a win-win. So I don't understand why there's constant regulatory barriers. And I just don't understand why the Department of Land and Natural Resources doesn't want to make an exception for this particular project, which needs at least a 60-year lease. And so while Mr. Hirokawa thinks that, the fact that they can still negotiate, I think the position of KIUC is not necessarily the same. So respectfully, Chair, I'll be voting with reservations.
Understandable. Thank you very much, Representative Har. Members, any other comments or questions before we proceed to voting on HB 1015? Okay, seeing none, Vice Chair Kitagawa, please.
The recommendation of the chair is to pass HB 1015 HD1 with amendments, noting the presence of all members and noting the reservations from Representative Har, Morikawa, and Onishi. Are there any other reservations? Are there any noes? Chair, your recommendation is adopted.
Thank you. Next on HB 1016 relating to the taking of marine life. This measure already has a defective date, so the recommendation is to pass this measure as is. Members, any comments or questions? Okay, seeing none, Vice Chair.
The recommendation of the chair is to pass HB 1016 HD1 as is, noting the presence of all members. Are there any reservations? Any noes? Chair, your recommendation is adopted.
Okay, next HB 499 relating to lease extensions on public land. Before we proceed to the recommendations here, I do just want to thank especially Chair Tarnas for his work and genuine tackling of this hard issue. Also, Representative Onishi, who's clearly done a lot of work on this issue, and especially Representative Har for her many years of stewardship when she was a leader of the Waterland Committee on this issue. As we've seen from the debate and testimony today, this clearly continues to be an issue and one that perhaps we may arrive at an eventual solution with this measure. So with that, members, I'll be recommending that we include, per some of the discussion and concerns brought up by Representative Onishi, a prohibition on the selling of lease to sublessees. And it already has a defective date, so that would be my amendment to this particular bill. Members, any comments or questions?
Chair,
Representative Onishi.
I want to thank you for that amendment. I think it's makes this bill a lot better. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you for the discussion. Members, any other comments or questions? Okay, if not, then Vice Chair Kitagawa.
The recommendation of the chair is to pass HB 499 HD1 with amendments, noting the presence of all members. Are there any reservations? Any noes? Chair, your recommendation is adopted.
Thank you. Next, we have HB 809 relating to broadband. My thanks to the Economic Development Committee Chair for his prior concurrence. Because this is changing the composition of the board and reducing it from 12 to 10 members, I do think we need to include some phase out language for the 2 members who end up rotating off the board. It already has a defective date, so just that one amendment to help effectuate this in a more feasible manner. Members, any comments or questions on the amendments to suggested amendments to HB 809? Okay, seeing none, Vice Chair Kitagawa, please.
The recommendation of the chair is to pass HB 809 HD1 with amendments, noting the presence of all members. Are there any reservations? Any noes? Chair, your recommendation is adopted.
Thank you. Next on HB 1191 relating to broadband service infrastructure, this would create a state grant program that would leverage a 40% private sector match to fund unserved areas with respect to broadband infrastructure. I do note, even though a lot of the testifiers didn't orally say so, members, if you look in your written testimony, there were some concerns raised by Hawaiian Telecom, and I think those are worth addressing. As a consequence, also with the prior concurrence of Chair Quinlan, I will be adding, just to ensure that we are 100% safe and don't potentially jeopardize federal funds like from the Rural Development Opportunity Fund and other similar federal grants meant to help provide infrastructure, broadband infrastructure to unserved communities. In page 6 of the bill, under eligible applicants, I'm going to add a subpoint 3 that also says to be eligible for the grant, an applicant shall 3 attest that the project will not jeopardize the eligibility of federal funding. This comports with the section that's already in the bill, but I just want to make it abundantly clear. I've also received the prior concurrence of Chair Quinlan to blank out the $5 million appropriation, but we will note that in the committee report Additionally, I also want to note that the intent of this measure in the committee report will be that it's supposed to be complementary with existing federal grants to try to help us build infrastructure and capacity in unserved areas, particularly in the neighbor islands. I'd also like to note in the committee report that 23 other states have similar state grant-making mechanisms, as well as include technical and non-substantive amendments. Members, any comments or questions? Okay, if not, Vice Chair for the vote, please.
The recommendation of the chair is to pass HB 1191 HD1 with amendments, noting the presence of all members. Are there any reservations? Any noes? Chair, your recommendation is adopted.
Thank you. Next on HB 303, relating to advanced practice registered nurses and whether they should be a part of the fitness to proceed examinations for criminal proceedings. I do think because we just made so many changes this past session to this legal process, I do tend to concur with the Attorney General as well as I think it was the Psychological Association that perhaps, although well-intended, this measure may not be completely right at the present moment. I think we need a little bit more time to see how the legal landscape has changed before we figure out APRN's potential role in these fitness to proceed examinations. So for those reasons, I will recommend that we defer HB 303. Next, HB 471 relating to behavior analysts. This is making permanent the regulation of behavior analysts. The recommendation here is just simply to defect the date to January 1, 2050, but note in the committee report that we need the final draft of this language to be effective before the expiration of the current law, which is the date that this is currently effective in. But I did secure prior concurrence from Chair Yamane to defect this measure so that we continue discussion. Members, any comments or questions? Okay, seeing none, Vice Chair.
The recommendation of the chair is to pass HB 471 with amendments, noting the presence of all members. Are there any reservations? Any noes? Chair, your recommendation is adopted.
Okay, thank you. Next, HB 327 relating to greenhouse gases. I think this is a great discussion to be having. I do agree with the State Energy Office that this bill should have a longer, more extended horizon for implementation. So my recommendation will be to amend this measure by extending the timelines explicated in the bill by a year so that it gives this task force a lot more time to meet to make its recommendations ultimately to the legislature. With that, I did receive prior concurrence from Chair Lowen from the EEP committee to make this amendment. With that, members, any comments or questions on the recommendation? Okay, thank you. Seeing none, Vice Chair for the vote, please.
The recommendation of the chair is to pass HB 327 HD1 with amendments, noting the presence of all members. Are there any reservations? Any noes? Chair, your recommendation is adopted.
Thank you. Next on HB 1092 relating to carbon offsets. I think we need to have this discussion continue as this is a voluntary program. So the recommendation will be to pass this measure as is. Members, any comments or questions? Okay, seeing none, thank you. Vice Chair for the vote, please.
The recommendation of the chair is to pass HB 1092 HD1 as is, noting the presence of all members. Are there any reservations? Any noes? Chair, your recommendation is adopted.
Thank you. Next on HB 801 relating to mopeds. And this would prohibit retailers from selling or offering the sale of combustion engine-powered mopeds beginning January 1, 2023. I think that, as we heard in testimony, there's just a lot of issues with this bill. It's well-intended, and I agree with the spirit of it, but I think the incredibly soon deadline for implementation is not probably practicable for those buying or selling mopeds at the present moment. So although laudable, the recommendation on HB 801 will be to defer this measure. Next, HB 393 relating to ground transportation. This would establish goals for the state to reduce its emissions across all sectors, establishing a clean ground transportation target for light duty vehicles, as well as prohibiting the sale of new motor vehicles that are solely powered by fossil fuels by an unspecified date. Again, I think this is also an important discussion to keep going, members. I would like to note in the committee report that because it's blank, I do want to make our intentions clear that there should be a sufficient horizon for the implementation of this to accommodate cost-effective price points for a range of consumers. Also, some of the concerns about potential workarounds, including buying the vehicle from the mainland and just having it shipped here, and how that potentially affects local dealers, and as well as potential supply and demand issues. It does already have a defective date, so I'd like to note a lot of that in the committee report, but the recommendation will be to move HB 393 as is. Members, any comments or questions?
Mr. Chairman.
Representative Har.
Thank you. Thank you for the recommendation, Mr. Chair. I think that, again, I appreciate the thoughtfulness that's going into the committee report. But that said, that's really the comments are going to be inserted into the committee report and not necessarily into the bill. So I just feel that we are not here in terms of the infrastructure that needs to be set up. The gentleman who testified and talked about California being the most restrictive still allows some type of gas-powered combustible vehicles in there, like I don't know what they're called. It's like a hybrid electricity and it's like the Volt that has electricity as well as gas. Again, the intent is extremely laudable, but at the end of the day, we have to look out for our local residents who may not be able to afford these types of vehicles. And so while I do appreciate those concessions being made in the committee report, it's not in the bill. So respectfully, Mr. Chair, I'll be going with reservations. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Har. Members, any other comments or questions?
Chair.
Representative Onishi.
I have the same concerns that there are a lot of issues with this bill that will affect local businesses and our general public. So I will also be voting with reservation.
Okay, thank you. Members, any other comments or questions?
Chair, I'll also be voting with reservations. Matsumoto.
Okay. Thank you, Representative Matsumoto.
Thank you.
Any other comments or questions, members, before we take the vote? Okay, seeing none, Vice Chair for the vote, please.
The recommendation of the chair is to pass HB 393 HD1 as is, noting the presence of all members and noting the reservations from Representative Har, Onishi, and Matsumoto. Are there any other reservations? Reservations from Morikawa. Any other? And from Representative Kong. Any other reservations? Are there any no's? Chair, your recommendation is adopted.
Thank you. Thank you, members. Next on HB 860 relating to rooftop solar installation. I think this measure is very well intended, but I think we would benefit from a little bit more time observing California's experience since they just implemented it and not even in a regular year since it was 2020. I'm not sure that because of the pandemic issues they're having, we have the full benefit of seeing how it's rolled out and how it's been implemented and affected consumers and construction of homes and affordability. So for those reasons, as well as some of the workability issues cited by the Hawaii State Energy Office in terms of granting the variances, I, at this time, will recommend that we defer this measure. So we'll defer HB 860. I think it just needs some more time. HB 1312 relating to intellectual property. Again, I think unfortunately there's some merit here in this bill, but some of the issues raised, I think by the CTAR Dean, mean that this one also probably should be deferred. I'm told that it's to address a farming issue, but in light of no additional testimony, the recommendation will also be to defer HB 1312 at this time. With that, we are adjourned, and my thanks to the public and members for their participation in this hearing today. We're adjourned.